Let's take a deep breath, relax, and slowly explore the story of bronze. Somewhere in the highlands of what is now southern Serbia, roughly 6,500 years ago, a person tending a fire watched the flames die down and found something strange in the ashes. Among the leftover bits of melted rock, a piece of metal gleamed with an unfamiliar color. It was not quite the reddish glow of copper which they already knew. It was something different, something harder, something that rang like a small bell when it was struck against stone. That person, whose name and face are lost to us forever, had just made the world's first known piece of bronze. And that small accidental creation would go on to reshape the entire course of human history. The little piece of metal they left behind was found thousands of years later at a place called Ploknik in the valley of the Toplica River. Scientists have dated it to roughly 4,650 years before the Common Era. For a long time, scholars believed that bronze was born in the great cities of the ancient Middle East, in places like Sumer and Babylon. But the evidence from Ploknik and from other sites across Serbia and Bulgaria tells a different story. It turns out that people in the Balkans were making bronze a full 1,500 years before anyone in the ancient Near East. And here is a lovely detail. This was not a planned invention. The people at Ploknik appear to have been heating a naturally occurring mineral that happened to contain both copper and tin locked together inside a single stone. When the heat was high enough, the mineral released its metals, and what poured out was bronze, a gift from the earth that those early metal workers could not have predicted or fully understood. They would have noticed only the result, a metal that was noticeably harder than anything they had worked with before, one that held a sharper edge and could be shaped into more complex forms. To understand what this meant, it helps to know what came before. For thousands of years, people had worked with pure copper. They had learned to find it gleaming in riverbeds and cliff faces, and to hammer it cold into simple tools and ornaments. They had even discovered that heating certain colorful green and blue minerals could release copper from stone, a breakthrough so deep that it essentially gave birth to the art of working with metals. But copper, for all its beauty, has one real weakness. It is soft. A copper blade dulls quickly. A copper axe bends under heavy use. For cutting and chopping, a well-shaped piece of volcanic glass was actually better than the finest copper knife. Bronze changed all of that. By mixing copper with a small amount of tin, roughly 1 part in 10, those ancient metalworkers created something that was harder than either metal on its own. It held a sharper edge. It resisted bending and wearing down. And here is something rather interesting. It actually melted at a lower temperature than pure copper, which meant it was easier to pour into molds despite being stronger once it cooled. That lower melting point also meant the liquid metal flowed more smoothly, filling in fine details that pure copper simply could not manage. The people who worked out the ideal mixture did so through generations of patient trying and testing. They had no understanding of the science beneath their fingertips, no knowledge of how tin atoms distort the inner structure of copper to make it resist bending. Their wisdom was practical, hard-won, and passed down from master to student, and it was remarkably consistent. Whether in the workshops of ancient Iraq or the foundries of early China, bronze makers arrived independently at similar recipes, a quiet testament to how reliable their methods were. But the bronze tradition that began in the Balkans did not last. After roughly 500 years, the production of these early alloys in the region faded away, disappearing at the end of the 5th millennium before the Common Era. The reasons remain uncertain. Climate change, the exhaustion of resources, social upheaval, migrations from the open grasslands to the east, all of these have been suggested. What is clear is that an entire way of working with metal was lost, and the center of bronze knowledge shifted eastward and southward toward the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and beyond. Before that silence fell, however, another form of bronze had been developing across wide stretches of the ancient world. This earlier version was made by mixing copper not with tin but with arsenic, a substance that occurs naturally in many copper ores. The resulting metal was harder than pure copper, though not quite as strong as good tin bronze, and it carried a grim cost. The fumes released during the work were poisonous, slowly harming the very people who made the alloy. Some scholars have wondered whether the ancient stories of metalworking gods who were lame or disfigured, like the Greek god of the forge who walked with a limp, might echo the real suffering of those early smiths. The shift from arsenic bronze to tin bronze happened gradually, unfolding over centuries as different cultures discovered or gained access to tin. And that search for tin would prove to be one of the most powerful forces in the ancient world, because tin is rare. Copper can be found in many places across the earth, but tin exists in useful amounts in only a handful of locations. The need to find and transport tin from far-off sources created the first long-distance trade networks, routes stretching across thousands of miles, connecting cultures that might otherwise have remained strangers. The person at Plochnik who first held that strange, hard metal in their hands could not have imagined what would follow. They could not have known that their accidental creation would one day arm the soldiers of the world's first empires, fill the tombs of Egyptian rulers, and give its name to an entire age of human history. They simply found something new in the ashes of their fire, something that worked better than what they had before, and they kept making it. And so the story of bronze begins, not with a grand plan or a flash of genius, but with a quiet accident in a hillside workshop, a small piece of metal gleaming in the fading light of a very old fire. Let us follow that metal now across continents and centuries and see where it takes us. Before there was bronze, there was copper. And before there was smelting, before there were furnaces or molds or any of the techniques we think of when we imagine metalwork, there were simply people picking up beautiful stones from the ground and wondering what they could do with them. In the foothills of the Taurus Mountains, at a settlement called Keonu Tepezi in what is now southeastern Turkey, people were already working with metal 9,000 years before the Common Era. They were not melting it or mixing it with anything. They were simply finding pieces of copper in their natural state, gleaming nuggets in nearby rock, and hammering them into shapes. The collection of objects they left behind, tiny beads, hooks, and pins, weighs barely more than a modern phone. Yet those modest little things represent one of the earliest chapters in the human relationship with metal, a relationship that would eventually lead to bronze, to iron, to steel, and to the world we know. The copper at Keonu came from a deposit only a short walk away, a deposit so persistent that it is still mined for copper today, making it one of the longest continuously used mineral resources on the planet. The people who first worked it did not need fire. Native copper, copper in its pure metallic form, can be found in certain rock formations just as it is, and it can be worked cold. You can hammer it into thin sheets, bend it, drill through it, grind it to an edge. The beads found at Keonu were drilled with stone tools. The small pointed awls were sharp enough to pierce leather. These were practical objects made from an unusual kind of stone, a stone that could be shaped in ways that flint could not, a stone that gleamed with a color unlike anything else in nature. This discovery was not unique to one place. Across the ancient world, wherever native copper appeared, people experimented with it. In the Great Lakes region of North America, communities produced a wonderful variety of copper objects, spear points, knives, fishhooks, bracelets, and beads, all worked from deposits of native copper found along the shores of the great freshwater lakes. These deposits were among the purest in the world, and the people who worked them developed clever methods for freeing the metal from rock, including heating the stone with fire and then pouring cold water over it to crack it apart. They worked with copper for thousands of years without ever developing the art of melting it down or mixing it with other metals, a reminder that the path from raw copper to bronze was neither obvious nor guaranteed. But it was the discovery of smelting, the use of controlled heat to pull metal out of ore, that truly opened the door to the age of metals. The earliest solid evidence for copper smelting comes from a site called Belovode, also in Serbia, where the first known smelting took place around 5,000 years before the Common Era. The finds there include the waste material left over from the process, along with minerals, ores, and finished objects that show an established practice stretching over roughly 400 years. The copper produced at Belovode was remarkably pure, which tells us that these early metalworkers had already figured out how to control the temperature and conditions inside their furnaces. And here is a connection worth pausing on. The link between pottery and metalwork is more than a coincidence. The kilns that potters used to fire clay could reach temperatures close to what was needed to melt copper. A potter working near certain colorful green minerals, perhaps using them as pigment or decoration, might have noticed that the stone changed under extreme heat, leaving behind small beads of gleaming metal. At Belovode and other sites, researchers have found direct links between pottery making and the beginnings of metalwork, suggesting that the people who invented smelting were the same people who made pots. The potter's kiln became the metalworker's furnace, and the skills built up over generations for one craft were quietly adapted to serve another. The era between the discovery of smelting and the invention of bronze is sometimes called the Copper Age, a transitional time in which copper tools existed alongside the stone tools that had served humanity for ages beyond counting. It was not a clean break. Copper was costly, difficult to produce, and still not as sharp as good volcanic glass for many cutting tasks. But copper had abilities that stone could not match. It could be melted and recast if broken. It could be hammered into complex shapes. It could be joined to other pieces. These qualities made copper especially valuable for ornaments, pins, and small tools, and they gave copper objects a prestige that plain stone had lost. People also learned, during these long centuries of experimenting, how heat changed the behavior of metal. They found that heating copper made it softer and easier to shape. They found that hammering it made it harder but also more brittle. They found that alternating between hammering and heating could produce tools of just the right hardness. Each of these discoveries was small, the result of patient watching and trying, but together they added up to something new, the first deliberate shaping of materials to serve human needs. In the Balkans, the wealth that copper brought is visible in the things people left behind. At the burial ground of Varna in Bulgaria, dating to roughly 4,600 years before the Common Era, one man was buried with more gold than has been found anywhere else in the world from that time, along with copper tools and weapons that marked him as someone connected to the metalworking world. The presence of both gold and copper in the same grave tells us that control of metal knowledge was already a mark of power, a pattern that would only grow stronger as copper gave way to bronze. The people of Kainu, hammering their tiny beads 9,000 years ago, stood at the very beginning of a journey they could not have imagined. Within a few thousand years, their descendants would be melting ore, casting intricate shapes, and producing the alloy that would define an entire age. Copper was the mother of bronze, and everything that followed, the armies and the temples, the trade routes and the empires, began with those first tentative hammer blows in the hills of ancient Turkey. Deep inside a mountain in southern Turkey, at a place called Kestel, archaeologists discovered a network of ancient tunnels carved into the rock between roughly 3,250 and 1,800 years before the Common Era. The tunnels twist and branch through miles of darkness, following veins of a heavy black mineral that is the main ore of tin. Some of the passages are so narrow that only a child could fit through them. And near the entrance, the diggers found a grave containing the remains of children who had almost certainly been workers in the mine. Those children, whose names we will never know, spent their short lives crawling through suffocating darkness to pull out a mineral that most of them probably never saw in its finished form, a silvery white metal that, when mixed with copper, created the substance their world was built upon. Tin is the essential ingredient in bronze, and its rarity shaped the politics of the ancient world as deeply as oil shapes the politics of our own. Copper is found in many places across the earth. Tin is not. The heavy mineral that contains tin appears in useful amounts in only a handful of locations, scattered widely across the globe. And the distance between those deposits and the great civilizations that needed bronze created trade networks of a size and complexity that had never existed before. If you could draw a map of the ancient tin trade, you would be looking at something very close to the first global economy. The major tin sources of the ancient world can nearly be counted on two hands. In Central Asia, mines in what are now Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Afghanistan supplied the civilizations of Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. One mine in Tajikistan, situated at a breathtaking altitude of more than 3,000 meters in a remote mountain range, has been confirmed by modern scientific analysis as a major supplier of tin to the ancient Middle East, its ore traveling westward through a chain of traders to reach the workshops of Sumer and Akkad. In Europe, three regions stood out. The mountains along the border of modern Germany and the Czech Republic were an important source from early on. The coastlands and highlands of Spain and Portugal provided tin to the western end of the sea. But the greatest European source of all was the far southwestern corner of England, in the region of Cornwall, whose tin production over the centuries has been estimated at roughly 2.5 million tons, dwarfing every other European source combined. The sheer scale of Cornish tin production suggests it was a vital supplier to the entire ancient world around the Mediterranean, though proving exactly where specific shipments ended up remains a challenge for scientists. And here is where the story becomes a kind of detective tale. Modern chemistry is slowly piecing together which tin sources fed which civilizations. Scientists have analyzed tin bars recovered from one of the most famous shipwrecks in all of archaeology, a trading vessel that sank off the coast of Turkey around 1300 years before the Common Era. That single ship, lost to a storm more than 3,000 years ago, carried 10 tons of copper and 1 ton of tin, enough raw material to make 11 tons of finished bronze. Analysis showed that roughly a third of the tin came from that high mountain mine in Tajikistan, while the rest came from mines in Turkey itself. The ship also carried gold, silver, ivory, rare wood, and ostrich eggs, a cargo worth a fortune that revealed just how interconnected the ancient world had become. Even more striking is the evidence linking Cornwall to the Eastern Mediterranean. Chemical fingerprinting of tin bars dated to the 12 and 1100s before the Common Era, found at sites in what are now Israel, Turkey, and Greece, has shown that some of this tin matches the signature of Cornish deposits. This means tin mined in southwestern England was traveling more than 3,000 kilometers to reach the workshops of the ancient Levant, passing through an unknown number of hands, each person adding their cost and their risk to a journey that must have taken months. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century before the Common Era, mentioned the Tin Islands, from which tin was said to come, but he admitted he could not say exactly where they were. Most scholars believe he was referring to Cornwall and the nearby islands. His vagueness suggests that the traders who controlled the tin route kept its source deliberately secret, protecting their business through mystery. The scarcity of tin had deep consequences. Whoever controlled the mines and the routes that connected them to bronze-hungry populations held enormous power. Rulers positioned themselves to guard these trade routes, building fortified outposts along the way. A leader who could supply bronze weapons to his soldiers and bronze tools to his farmers had an advantage that leaders without access to tin simply could not match. Diplomatic letters between ancient rulers, preserved on clay tablets, include direct requests for tin, treated as a strategic resource on par with gold and silver. The mining itself was brutal work. The heavy mineral appears in two forms, as loose grains in riverbeds, washed down from parent rock over millions of years, and as hard deposits locked inside granite. Panning for the loose grains in rivers was simpler, and was probably the earliest method. Mining the hard rock, like the operations at Kestel, required tunneling into solid stone with simple tools, a process that was slow, dangerous, and physically devastating. Some scholars have argued that the collapse of Bronze Age civilizations around 1200 years before the Common Era was connected, at least in part, to the failure of these tin supply networks. When the vast web of trade that fed the great kingdoms with tin was disrupted, whether by invasion, drought, or internal upheaval, the ability to make bronze weapons and tools was put at risk. The parallel to modern worries about disruptions in the supply of rare materials is hard to miss. The story of tin is, in many ways, the hidden story of the Bronze Age. Copper gets the credit, and bronze gets the name. But it was tin, scarce and distant and desperately needed, that decided which civilizations rose and which fell, which armies conquered and which retreated. The children in the mines of Kestel, working in the dark to pull out a mineral whose full value they may never have grasped, were the invisible foundation upon which an entire age of civilization was built. In the winter of 1927, a British archaeologist named Leonard Woolley reached into the earth of southern Iraq and pulled out a dagger that changed our understanding of the ancient world. The blade was made of gold. The handle was crafted from a deep blue stone called lapis lazuli, studded with gold rivets. The sheath was decorated with the finest gold metalwork. It had been buried alongside bronze spears, copper weapons, and the bodies of dozens of attendants who had been sacrificed to accompany their ruler into the afterlife. Woolley had discovered the royal cemetery of the city of and with it, evidence of a civilization that was already producing sophisticated bronze more than 4,500 years ago. The discovery made headlines across the world, but it was not the gold that told the most important story. It was the bronze. Among the objects in the royal tombs, scientists found tin bronzes whose tin had been sourced from mines in Afghanistan more than 2,000 kilometers to the east. This meant that by roughly 2,600 years before the Common Era, the city of was already at the heart of a trade network spanning much of Western and Central Asia, a network driven in large part by the hunger for the two metals that, when combined, produced the alloy on which their entire civilization depended. And here is what makes this especially remarkable. Mesopotamia, the land between the two great rivers, had no copper and no tin of its own. The flat plain was rich in clay, water, and farmland, but it was almost entirely without metal ores or building stone. Every piece of bronze in Sumer had to come from somewhere else, either as finished metal or as raw material from distant sources. Copper arrived from mines in what is now Oman, traveling by sea through the island of Bahrain, which served as a trading hub. Tin traveled overland from Afghanistan and Central Asia, passing through chains of merchants before reaching the workshops of the great cities. This dependence on imported metal shaped the civilization in profound ways. The palace and temple economies of the Sumerian city-states were organized in large part around getting, storing, and handing out metals. Clay tablets from the 3rd millennium before the Common Era record careful inventories of bronze tools and weapons, listing their weight, who received them, and which workshops made them. Managing bronze was not a small task handled by minor officials. It was a central responsibility of the state, as important as managing grain or maintaining the irrigation canals. Bronze transformed farming in Mesopotamia. The heavy clay soils of the river plain were difficult to work with stone tools, but bronze plowshares and hoes could cut through the earth more efficiently, letting farmers cultivate larger areas and produce the surpluses that fed growing cities. Bronze sickles harvested grain faster. Bronze axes felled trees for building and firewood. The increase in productivity that bronze tools made possible was not small. It was the kind of change that helped sustain the world's first true cities, places with populations in the tens of thousands. Bronze also transformed warfare. The armies of Sumer and its neighboring kingdoms fought with bronze-tipped spears and javelins, bronze daggers and axes, and bronze-reinforced shields. A famous decorated box found in the royal cemetery, known as the Standard of shows soldiers in formation carrying spears and riding four-wheeled chariots, among the earliest known images of wheeled vehicles used in battle. When Sargon of Akkad united Mesopotamia under a single ruler around 2334 before the Common Era, creating what many consider the world's first empire, he did it partly through brilliant military organization and partly through control of trade routes. His empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, covering the corridors that connected copper sources in Turkey and Oman with tin sources in Afghanistan. Controlling those routes meant controlling the supply of bronze, and controlling the supply of bronze meant controlling who could arm themselves. Sargon boasted in his inscriptions that ships from distant lands docked at the quays of his capital, bringing the raw materials of empire to his door. The skill of Mesopotamian bronze workers reached extraordinary levels. At craftsmen produced not only weapons and tools, but elaborate decorative pieces. A famous copper head of a ruler, possibly Sargon himself, found at the ancient city of Nineveh, is a masterwork of early casting, its face rendered with a calm authority that still feels alive 4,000 years later. The smiths understood how to adjust the amount of tin in their bronze to get different results, using more tin for cutting tools that needed to be hard and less for objects that needed to absorb impact without cracking. Bronze was also deeply important in Mesopotamian religious life. Gleaming bronze statues of gods stood in the inner rooms of temples, their surfaces catching the flickering light of oil lamps. Bronze pegs were driven into the earth beneath temple walls, shaped like nails with human or animal figures at their tops, inscribed with the names of kings who wished to be remembered for their devotion. These pegs were both structural elements and protective charms, binding the building to the ground and guarding it from unseen harm. Bronze vessels held the offerings of grain and drink that sustained the gods. The metal was not merely useful. It was considered sacred, a gift from the earth that connected the human world to the divine. As Mesopotamian civilization evolved through the centuries, through the dynasties of the rise of Babylon, and the might of Assyria, bronze remained at the center of life. The Assyrian Empire, which dominated the region from the 9th to the 7th centuries before the Common Era, maintained vast stockpiles of bronze weapons and employed specialized metalworkers who outfitted armies numbering in the tens of thousands. Carved stone panels from Assyrian palaces show soldiers stripping bronze from conquered cities, carrying away enormous vessels and statues, depriving the defeated of their most important resource, while filling their own treasury with metal that could be melted down and reshaped. The bronze of Mesopotamia was never just a metal. It was the currency of power, the medium of art, the tool of farming, and the weapon of empire. Every bar of metal that arrived in a Mesopotamian port carried with it the labor of miners in far-off mountains, the risk of traders who crossed deserts and seas, and the gathered knowledge of metalworkers who had refined their craft over thousands of years. And in the busy workshops of and Babylon, that bar would be transformed into something new, something that helped build and defend a civilization that endured for 3,000 years. On the sun-scorched plateau of Giza, around 2560 before the Common Era, thousands of workers quarried limestone blocks weighing up to 2.5 tons each, cut them to exact measurements, and dragged them into position to build the Great Pyramid. The tools they used for this monumental work were, by modern standards, almost absurdly simple. Copper picks to quarry the stone, copper saws to cut it, copper chisels to shape it. And for every few inches of stone cut, the workers lost a bit of metal from their blade, dulled against the rock. Teams of metal workers were employed full-time at the site, doing nothing but resharpening and recasting the tools that wore down against the pyramid stones. Yet with these soft, stubborn instruments, they built a structure that remained the tallest in the world for nearly 4,000 years. The pyramid builders of the Old Kingdom were working not with true bronze, but with a natural copper alloy, one that formed when ores containing both copper and arsenic were heated together. This alloy was harder than pure copper and could be made harder still through careful hammering and reheating. But even at its best, it was a poor match for the hard stone of the Egyptian quarries. The tools were good enough for limestone, which is relatively soft, but for the granite used in the pyramid's inner chambers, workers had to use a grinding technique, rubbing the stone with pieces of even harder stone mixed with sand, a method that was painfully slow but effective. The copper that fed Egypt's workshops came mostly from mines in the Sinai Peninsula, a stretch of desert within reach of the Nile Valley. Egyptian carvings at those mine sites record the names of the rulers who sent the mining expeditions. At a harbor on the Red Sea coast, discovered only in 2013, archaeologists found the remains of a huge support operation where hundreds of workers loaded ore and blue-green stone onto boats for the journey back to the Nile. A diary written on papyrus, found at that harbor and dating to the reign of the pharaoh who built the Great Pyramid, is the oldest known papyrus in the world. It gives a day-by-day account of transporting limestone blocks, revealing the extraordinary organizational ability that made both mining and monument building possible. The shift from this natural copper alloy to true tin bronze in Egypt happened slowly over several centuries. During the Middle Kingdom, roughly 2050 to 1650 before the Common Era, tin bronze started appearing alongside the older alloy. By the time of the New Kingdom, beginning around 1550 before the Common Era, tin bronze had become the main metal. This change came as Egypt grew more involved in the international trade networks of the Late Bronze Age, which gave Egyptian craftsmen access to tin through established trade routes. Diplomatic letters between the Egyptian court and the rulers of Babylon and Assyria include requests for tin and copper, showing that getting the ingredients for bronze was a matter of the highest importance. The New Kingdom is often considered the peak of ancient Egyptian power, and it was also the golden age of Egyptian bronze work. The tombs of rulers and nobles from this period contain a wonderful variety of bronze objects. Weapons and tools, of course, but also mirrors, razors, tweezers, medical instruments, ceremonial vessels, and small figures of gods and animals. The tomb of the young king Tutankhamun alone contained dozens of bronze pieces, each crafted with careful attention to detail. Egyptian bronze mirrors deserve a quiet moment of attention because they show how a simple practical object can become something beautiful. The typical mirror was a flat, polished bronze disc attached to a handle. Over time, the handles evolved from plain grips into elaborate small sculptures, sometimes showing a human figure appearing to hold the disc above their head, sometimes featuring the face of Hathor, the goddess of beauty and music. When properly polished, a bronze mirror with the right mixture of metals could reflect almost as clearly as modern glass. These mirrors were not just useful objects. They were markers of status and played a part in religious rituals, their bronze surfaces kept bright by constant care. Egypt's bronze workers also mastered the art of casting through the lost wax method, a technique in which a model is shaped in wax, covered in clay, heated until the wax melts away, and then filled with molten bronze. By the Middle Kingdom, they were producing hollow castings, which used less metal and allowed for larger, lighter objects. A small but exquisitely detailed dark bronze figure of Tutankhamun found in his tomb was made using this advanced technique, its surface treated to achieve a dark color that was then highlighted with gold, creating a striking contrast that still arrests viewers today. Bronze also played a role in Egyptian spiritual life that went beyond statues. The sistrum, a ceremonial rattle sacred to the goddess Hathor and later to Isis, was often made of bronze. Its tinkling sound was believed to have the power to drive away harmful spirits and to please the gods, and it was shaken by priests during temple ceremonies. Bronze sistrums have been found across the Mediterranean world, carried there by the spread of Egyptian religious customs. During the later centuries of Egyptian history, roughly 664 to 332 before the Common Era, enormous numbers of small bronze figurines were produced as offerings to the gods. Millions of little bronze statues showing deities such as Osiris, Isis, Horus, and the cat goddess Bastet were cast in workshops all over Egypt and left in temples by worshippers seeking divine favor. Animal figures were equally popular. Cats sacred to Bastet, birds sacred to Thoth, falcons sacred to Horus, all made by the thousands and sold to pilgrims. The sheer scale suggests something close to an industry, with specialized workshops producing standard designs for a mass market of the faithful. The story of bronze in Egypt is a story of adaptation and ambition. From the soft copper tools that built the pyramids to the gleaming mirrors that reflected the faces of queens, from the rattles that filled temples with sacred sound to the millions of small figures left as prayers in metal, Egypt used bronze not merely as a useful substance, but as a way of making human desire permanent. And that tradition, born in the Sinai copper mines and refined over 3,000 years of unbroken effort, left its mark on everything that came after. In 1926, at the ancient city of Mohenjo-Daro in what is now Pakistan, an archaeologist reached into the earth and pulled out a small bronze figure that would become one of the most celebrated sculptures in the history of art. She stands just 10.5 centimeters tall, a young woman with an attitude of startling confidence. Her left hand rests on her hip. Her right arm hangs loose at her side. 24 or 25 bangles are stacked from wrist to shoulder on her left arm and 4 more on her right. Her head is tilted slightly back, her expression serene and faintly amused, as though she is perfectly aware of the effect she has on anyone who looks at her. Scholars have called her the dancing girl of Mohenjo-Daro, though no one knows for certain whether she was actually a dancer. The name is a modern invention. When the archaeologist Sir Mortimer Wheeler first saw her, he said she would look perfectly at home walking down any street in a modern city. She is, in his words, absolutely at ease with the world. What is not in question is the skill that created her. The dancing girl was cast in bronze using the lost wax method, the same technique that would later produce the masterworks of West Africa, South India, and Renaissance Italy. The metal workers of the Indus Valley understood how to shape a wax model, encase it in clay, melt out the wax, and pour molten bronze into the space left behind. The precision of the casting is quietly remarkable. The bangles on her arm, each barely a millimeter thick, were cast as part of the figure rather than added separately, a detail that reveals extraordinary control over the entire process. The civilization that produced her, known as the Harappan or Indus Valley Civilization, flourished between roughly 3,300 and 1,300 years before the Common Era across a vast area covering much of modern Pakistan and northwestern India. At its peak, it was the largest of the ancient Bronze Age civilizations, stretching over more than 1 million square kilometers, larger than either Mesopotamia or Egypt. Its population may have reached 5 million people. Its 2 greatest cities, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, were planned urban centers with sophisticated drainage systems, standardized brick buildings, and large public structures, including a great bath 12 meters long and 7 meters wide, lined to be perfectly watertight, which may have served a ritual cleansing purpose. Bronze was woven into the fabric of daily life across the Indus Valley. Excavations at sites throughout the region have turned up bronze knives, saws, chisels, fishhooks, and needles, as well as spear points and arrowheads. Bronze bowls and cups were used for preparing and storing food. Bronze ornaments, including the bangles so prominently displayed on the dancing girl, were worn by both men and women and may have indicated status or identity. At the site of Dolavira in a salt marsh in western India, metal workers' quarters have been identified, complete with furnaces, melting pots, and half-finished bronze objects, showing that specialized craft production was an important part of the urban economy. The sources of tin for the Indus Valley bronze industry remain a subject of active study. The most likely source is Afghanistan, where tin deposits are found in the same regions that supplied the Mesopotamian bronze industry. Western India also contains both copper and tin deposits that may have been used during this period. And we know that the Indus Valley maintained wide-reaching trade connections with Mesopotamia, documented by the presence of Indus seals and objects in Mesopotamian sites, and the reverse. The Mesopotamians knew the Indus Valley by a special name and recorded importing various luxury goods from it, including finely made beads and ivory. The dancing girl is not the only remarkable bronze from Mohenjo-Daro. A second bronze figure was also found there, along with bronze models of animals, particularly bulls, that display the same confident naturalism. The bull figurines, with their carefully shaped humps and muscular bodies, suggest that the bronze casters were keen observers of the living world, translating what they saw into metal with notable skill. A bronze model of a bullock cart from another nearby site captures the form and proportions of a vehicle that is still used in parts of South Asia today, a quiet continuity stretching across 4,000 years. Can you picture that for a moment? A bronze toy cart made by a metal worker in a city that has been dust for millennia, capturing a shape so practical, so perfectly suited to its purpose, that it is still rolling along dusty roads in our own time. The end of the Indus Valley civilization, which came gradually between roughly 1900 and 1300 years before the Common Era, remains one of the great mysteries of the ancient world. The cities were not destroyed by invading armies as far as we can tell. They were slowly abandoned, their populations drifting into smaller settlements elsewhere. The reasons are still debated. Changes in the course of rivers may have deprived cities of water. Droughts linked to shifts in the monsoon may have ruined harvests. Disease and disruptions to trade networks may have played their part. Whatever the cause, the bronze working tradition did not vanish with the cities. It survived, carried by migrating communities and passed along through networks of craftsmen, eventually flowing into the metalworking traditions of later periods in the Indian subcontinent, a continuous thread of knowledge that connects the dancing girl to the great Chola bronzes of medieval South India, which we will meet later in our story. Today, the dancing girl lives in a museum in New Delhi, where she was sent during the partition of India and Pakistan in 1947. Pakistan has asked for her return more than once, arguing that she was found on Pakistani soil. She remains a point of gentle dispute between two nations. But wherever she is displayed, she speaks across the millennia with the same quiet self-assurance her creator gave her some 4,000 years ago, a small figure in bronze, carrying the artistry and skill of a vanished world in her 10.5 centimeters of metal. In 1939, in a field near a village in Henan province, China, a farmer's plow struck something enormous buried in the earth. What emerged from the soil was the largest ancient bronze vessel ever found, a rectangular cauldron standing over a meter tall and weighing roughly 833 kilograms, nearly a full ton of cast bronze from the late Shang dynasty, more than 3,000 years ago. The vessel is decorated with fierce, symmetrical animal faces, the signature design of Chinese Bronze Age art, and bears an inscription dedicating it to a royal mother. To cast something this massive with the tools available 3,000 years ago required not only extraordinary skill, but an entire industrial operation capable of mining, transporting, and melting hundreds of kilograms of copper and tin, then pouring the resulting alloy into a single, precisely built mold. Modern estimates suggest the casting required a team of more than 200 people working at the same moment, coordinating multiple containers of molten metal to pour together so the bronze would join without weak spots. Can you picture that scene? 200 people, all working in unison around a white-hot mold, knowing that a single mistake could ruin months of preparation. The Chinese Bronze Age is unlike any other in the world, and the difference starts with technique. While nearly every other bronze casting civilization used the lost wax method, Chinese bronze casters developed a unique approach called piece mold casting. In this technique, a model of the desired vessel is first sculpted in clay. Then a clay mold is built around it, and when dry, this outer mold is carefully cut into sections, taken apart, and hardened in a kiln. The sections are then put back together around a clay core, with small spaces keeping a precise gap into which the molten bronze is poured. When the metal cools, the outer mold is broken away to reveal the finished vessel. This method had real advantages. Because decorative patterns could be carved directly into the inner surface of each mold section before assembly, Chinese casters achieved a crispness and precision of decoration that is almost impossible to match with lost wax casting. The sharp geometric patterns and fine raised lines that define Shang and Zhou bronzes are products of this mold carving technique, and they give Chinese ritual bronzes a look entirely their own, different from the bronzes of any other civilization on Earth. The Shang dynasty, which ruled much of northern China from roughly 1600 to 1046 before the Common Era, placed bronze production at the very center of political and religious life. These ritual vessels were not merely decorative luxury goods. They were instruments of power used in elaborate ceremonies to communicate with the spirits of ancestors and to make visible the authority of the ruling family. The right to own and use certain types of vessels was tied directly to political rank. Displaying a set of bronzes at a court ceremony was a public declaration of status, as binding as any written law. Each type of vessel had a specific purpose. The great cauldrons, called ding, were the most symbolically important, originally used for cooking and storing meat, but eventually becoming the supreme emblem of rule. Legend held that a mythical sage king had cast 9 such cauldrons representing the 9 provinces of China, and to possess them was to possess the right to rule the whole land. Other vessels held grain offerings, warmed wine, stored spirits, or were used for ritual washing. A complete set for a major ceremony might include dozens of individual pieces, each cast to strict standards and inscribed with dedications to the ancestors. The inscriptions on these vessels are among the most important written records we have of early Chinese history. Cast into the metal as part of the mold-making process, they record the names of kings, the dates of ceremonies, the reasons for casting, and the victories and achievements that called for celebration. Some inscriptions are just a few symbols long. Others run to several hundred characters, providing detailed accounts of royal audiences, grants of land, and political agreements. Together, they form a body of historical evidence that both supports and sometimes contradicts the traditional written histories of China. The scale of bronze production in ancient China was staggering. At a foundry site in Shanxi province, archaeologists discovered the remains of a bronze casting operation that dwarfs anything known from the rest of the ancient world. The site contained more than 30,000 fragments of molds and models, along with furnaces, melting pots, leftover metal, and casting tools covering an area of roughly 100,000 square meters. This was not a small workshop producing a few precious objects for the court. It was something closer to an industrial facility capable of making bronzes in large numbers, including vessels, bells, coins, and chariot fittings. The tomb of Fu Hao, a Shang queen and military commander who died around 1200 years before the Common Era, contained 468 bronze objects, including 200 ritual vessels, the richest single collection of Shang bronzes ever found in an undisturbed grave. Her burial tells us that bronze was not reserved for men alone, and that women of sufficient rank could command enormous resources for their passage into the next world. When the Shang gave way to the Zhou dynasty around 1046 before the Common Era, the style and meaning of bronze vessels shifted. Zhou bronzes tend to be plainer in their surface decoration with longer inscriptions. The change reflects a broader shift in thinking about power. While the Shang had emphasized communication with spirits through elaborate sacrifice, the Zhou placed greater weight on the idea of a heavenly mandate, the notion that a ruler's authority comes from moral virtue. Bronze vessels remained important to the political order, but their inscriptions increasingly served as records of real events, legal agreements, and matters of government. In the centuries that followed, As China fragmented into competing states, bronze production spread beyond royal workshops to regional centers, and new forms appeared. Bronze mirrors, belt buckles, and lamps became common. Some lamps were shaped as figures of servants holding lanterns, showing a playfulness and everyday humanity that stands in contrast to the solemn ritual vessels of earlier times. By the time China was unified under the Qin dynasty in 221 before the Common Era, the great age of ritual bronzes was drawing to its close. Iron had become the main metal for tools and weapons. But the legacy of Chinese Bronze Age art endures. The ritual vessels of the Shang and Zhou represent one of the supreme achievements of human craftsmanship, a tradition in which technology and meaning were so deeply joined that the objects themselves became inseparable from the civilization that made them. On a summer day in 1982, a sponge diver named Mehmet Kakir was working the waters off the southern coast of Turkey when he spotted a strange formation on the seabed. What looked like metal discs with ear-shaped handles, a shape he recognized as ancient, lay scattered across the rocky bottom at a depth of about 44 meters. He reported his find, and what followed was one of the most important underwater excavations in the history of archaeology. Over 11 seasons, divers made more than 22,000 trips to the site, recovering the cargo of a trading vessel that had sunk around 1,300 years before the Common Era. What they brought up was a window into a world of maritime trade so sophisticated that it challenges any casual idea about the simplicity of ancient life. The ship carried the largest collection of raw metals ever found from the Bronze Age, 348 copper bars totaling 10 tons, and more than 100 bars of pure tin weighing over a ton. The copper was shaped into a distinctive form, flat rectangles with handles at each corner, designed to be carried by 2 people or slung across the back of a donkey. The tin came from at least 2 different sources, one in Central Asia and one in the mountains of Turkey. The ratio of copper to tin in the cargo was roughly 10:1, the standard recipe for high-quality bronze. This was not a random pile of metal. It was a carefully planned shipment, enough raw material to make 11 tons of finished bronze, sufficient to equip an army or furnish a palace. Beyond the metals, the ship held glass, unworked elephant tusks, ostrich eggshells, rare beads, dark wood from Africa, tree resin stored in great jars, and a wealth of finished goods including gold and silver jewelry, bronze tools and pottery from half a dozen different cultures. A small gold seal bearing the name of the Egyptian queen Nefertiti helped pin down the cargo's date. The collection closely matches the kinds of royal gifts described in the diplomatic letters exchanged between the Egyptian court and the rulers of the surrounding kingdoms. This ship was, in all likelihood, carrying presents between royal houses, a floating embassy loaded with the strategic materials and luxury items that kept Bronze Age diplomacy moving. The world through which this ship sailed was dominated by 2 civilizations that owed much of their wealth to bronze. On the island of Crete, the Minoan civilization had flourished since roughly 2,700 years before the Common Era, centered on sprawling palace complexes. The Minoans were skilled builders, painters, and traders, and their bronze workshops produced tools, weapons, and ritual objects that were exchanged across the eastern Mediterranean. Minoan metalworkers were especially known for producing bronze double axes, which served both as practical tools and as ceremonial symbols. Some scholars think the word labyrinth, the name for the legendary maze beneath the palace of Knossos, may come from the word for this double axe, the palace being so complex in its layout that it felt like a maze to visitors. On the Greek mainland, the Mycenaean civilization rose to power around 1600 years before the Common Era and quickly became the dominant military force in the region. The Mycenaeans were warriors above all, and their relationship with bronze was defined by conflict. The grave circles at the citadel of Mycenae, dug up in the 1870s, revealed spectacular bronze weapons alongside gold death masks and other treasures, the possessions of a warrior aristocracy that measured status by the quality and quantity of its arms. Perhaps the most dramatic piece of Mycenaean bronze is a complete suit of body armor found at a village called Dendra in southern Greece, dating to the late 1500s before the Common Era. The suit consists of 15 separate pieces of bronze sheet held together with leather straps, covering the wearer from neck to knees. For a long time, many scholars assumed this armor was too heavy for real combat, meant only for ceremony. But a study conducted in recent years put that idea to rest. Modern volunteers wearing careful copies of the armor performed extended combat exercises, including simulated chariot fighting and hand-to-hand battle, and showed that the armor did not significantly limit their ability to fight or cause excessive strain. The Mycenaean warrior in full bronze armor was a formidable opponent, protected from neck to knee in a shell of beaten metal. The sea itself was the thread that held this world together. The Eastern Mediterranean in the late Bronze Age was a web of connections, with ships carrying metals, luxury goods, and food between Egypt, the coast of what is now Lebanon and Syria, Turkey, Cyprus, Crete, and mainland Greece. The island of Cyprus, with its rich copper deposits, was the single most important source of copper for the entire region. Copper bars from Cyprus, each weighing roughly 25 to 30 kilograms, have been found at sites stretching from Egypt to the Western Mediterranean. The very name Cyprus may come from the Latin word for copper, which itself came from a Greek phrase meaning metal of Cyprus. A second shipwreck, found off the Turkish coast and dating to roughly 1200 years before the Common Era, the very end of the Bronze Age, offers a complementary picture. This smaller vessel carried scrap bronze and copper bars alongside a metalworker's tools, suggesting a traveling craftsman who sailed from port to port buying old metal and selling finished goods. The contrast between the grand diplomatic cargo of the first ship and the humbler load of the second captures the full range of Bronze Age maritime trade, from the exchange of gifts between kings to the everyday commerce that served ordinary communities. This web of connection was the Aegean bronze world's greatest strength, but it was also its greatest weakness. When the systems that sustained it began to crack around 1200 years before the Common Era, the consequences would be felt by every civilization that depended on them. But that is a story for our next chapter. For now, let us simply picture those ships crossing the bright blue water, laden with copper and tin and the finished bronze that both metals made, connecting a network of cultures whose richness and complexity would not be matched in the region for centuries after their fall. Around the year 1185 before the Common Era, the thriving port city of Ugarit, on the coast of what is now Syria, received a desperate letter. The king of a nearby island warned of enemy ships spotted at sea. The king of Ugarit replied that his own fleet was away on a distant mission, and that his army was stationed far to the north. The city was defenseless. The letter was found by archaeologists in a kiln, where it had been placed for baking but never collected. The city of Ugarit was destroyed, burned to the ground, and never lived in again. The letter, hardened by the very fire that consumed the city around it, is one of the most haunting documents in all of ancient history. It is a message that arrived too late to save anything. Ugarit was not alone. Within the span of roughly 50 years, between approximately 1200 and 1150 before the Common Era, a wave of destruction swept across the Eastern Mediterranean that toppled or gravely weakened nearly every major civilization in the region. The Hittite Empire, which had controlled much of Turkey and northern Syria for centuries and had been powerful enough to fight Egypt to a draw in one of the ancient world's great battles, collapsed completely. Its capital was burned and abandoned, its libraries of clay tablets left to crumble in the ruins. The Mycenaean civilization of mainland Greece disintegrated, its great fortress cities destroyed or deserted, its writing system forgotten for centuries. Egypt survived but was permanently weakened, its empire beyond its own borders lost, its frontiers retreating to the Nile Valley. Dozens of smaller kingdoms and city-states across the coast of the Eastern Mediterranean were destroyed, many of them showing signs of burning and violent destruction in their final layers of earth. The causes of this catastrophe, which historians call the Late Bronze Age collapse, have been debated for more than 100 years. The ancient Egyptians blamed a mysterious group they called the Sea Peoples, raiders from across the Mediterranean whose exact identity remains uncertain. The pharaoh Ramesses III had carved scenes of his battles against them on the walls of his memorial temple, showing land and sea fights against warriors wearing distinctive horned helmets and carrying round shields. The inscriptions name several groups, but scholars still argue about where these people came from. Some may have been the ancestors of the biblical Philistines. Others may have come from Sicily or other Mediterranean islands. Many of them may have been refugees from civilizations that had already failed, displaced people searching for new homes in a world falling apart around them. Modern thinking increasingly favors a model in which many different stresses combined to overwhelm civilizations that had become too connected and too specialized to survive disruption. No single cause was enough to explain the collapse, but the combination of devastating earthquakes, severe drought, crop failure, invasion, internal rebellion, and the breakdown of trade routes created something like a perfect storm. Records from lake beds and soil samples confirm a harsh drought across the eastern Mediterranean around this time. Earthquake damage is visible at multiple sites that were destroyed during this period. The drought may have triggered famine, which provoked unrest, mass migration, and the raiding expeditions of the Sea Peoples. And here is where bronze sits at the very heart of the story. Every major Bronze Age civilization depended on long-distance trade to get at least one of the two metals needed to make it. Mesopotamia had neither copper nor tin. Egypt had copper from the Sinai but needed tin from abroad. The Mycenaean kingdoms relied on imports for both metals in large quantities. The Hittites controlled some copper but depended on trade for tin. This mutual dependence created a web of exchange that, when working smoothly, was enormously productive. It was the ancient world's version of a connected global economy, and like its modern counterpart, it was dangerously vulnerable to disruption. When trade routes were broken, whether by invaders, drought, or political collapse, the supply of essential materials could be cut off, leaving craftsmen without raw materials, armies without weapons, and farmers without tools. Some scholars have argued that the disruption of tin supplies was a crucial part of the collapse. Tin from Afghanistan had to travel thousands of kilometers through a chain of traders before reaching the workshops of the Eastern Mediterranean. Any break in that chain, any conflict or drought along the way, could sever the supply at its source. Yet the relationship between the tin trade and this great collapse is more complicated than a simple interruption. Recent studies have shown that tin did not stop moving entirely after 1200 before the Common Era. It continued to circulate, though in smaller amounts and through less organized channels. What truly collapsed was the system that had managed the trade, the network of officials, scribes, and royal warehouses that had coordinated the movement of resources across kingdoms and cultures. Without that coordination, trade became more chaotic, more expensive, and less reliable. But it did not cease altogether. What was lost was not the metal itself, but the system that made its distribution efficient. The consequences were deep and long-lasting. In many parts of the Eastern Mediterranean, city life simply ended. Cities were abandoned, the ability to read and write was lost, and populations fell sharply. In Greece, the Mycenaean world gave way to a period of roughly 400 years from which almost no written records survive, during which population in some areas may have dropped by as much as 3/4. Not every civilization fell. Egypt survived, though diminished. Assyria in northern Mesopotamia weathered the crisis and would eventually rise to dominate the region. And some areas that had been on the edges of the Bronze Age world, including the coast of what is now Lebanon, actually came through the crisis in a stronger position, filling the gap left by the fall of the great kingdoms. There is an irony here worth pausing on. The collapse may have actually sped up the adoption of iron as a replacement for bronze. Iron ore is far more common than tin. A community that lost access to tin could not make bronze, but with enough heat and skill, it could work iron from local sources. The shift to iron was driven not only by iron being a better metal, which at first it was not, but by the simple practical truth that iron could be found almost anywhere, in a world where the trade networks that supplied tin had broken down. The Bronze Age collapse is sometimes called the worst disaster in ancient history, a dark age from which recovery took centuries. But it is also, in a quiet way, the story of bronze's deepest limitation. An alloy that depends on combining two metals found in different parts of the world needs a working system of exchange to exist. When that system breaks, the alloy breaks with it. Bronze did not cause the collapse, but its very nature, the need for distant tin, made the civilizations that depended on it vulnerable to a kind of failure that a simpler technology might have avoided. In 1966, in a small village in northeastern Thailand, a young student from Harvard tripped over a tree root on a dirt path and fell face first into the mud. When he picked himself up, he noticed that the rains had washed pieces of broken pottery out of the ground, some of them painted with striking designs he had never seen before. That accidental tumble led to one of the most heated archaeological debates of the 20th century and challenged long-held ideas about where and when bronze first appeared. The bronze objects found at that village, called Ban Chiang, were initially dated to somewhere between 3,600 and 4,000 years before the Common Era. If those dates were right, they would have been older than any known bronze from Mesopotamia or China. The idea was startling. Southeast Asia, a region that most Western scholars had dismissed as a backwater of the ancient world, might have been the birthplace of bronze itself. The discovery set off a wave of excitement and argument that lasted for decades. Later testing using more refined methods brought the dates down considerably, placing the start of the Bronze Age in Thailand at somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 years before the Common Era, much later than the original claims, but still significant in its own right. The village was named a protected heritage site by the United Nations in 1992. And the question of whether Southeast Asian bronze was invented independently or arrived through contact with China remains open, though most evidence now suggests at least some degree of influence from the Great River Valley civilizations to the north. Whatever its origins, the bronze tradition that took root in Southeast Asia was remarkable on its own terms. Nowhere is this more clear than in the culture that flourished in northern Vietnam from roughly the 5th century before the Common Era to the 1st century of the Common Era, centered in the Red River Delta and the surrounding highlands. This culture is best known for its extraordinary bronze drums, massive instruments cast in a single piece using the lost wax method. Imagine one of these drums for a moment. It stands nearly a meter tall, weighing several hundred kilograms, its flat top decorated with scenes so detailed they feel alive. There are boats filled with feathered warriors paddling in procession. Musicians play instruments. Deer run in long lines. Herons and water birds stand among patterns of spiraling lines and concentric circles. At the center of each drum sits a star, typically with between 8 and 16 rays that may represent the sun. The largest of these drums are monuments in bronze. The most famous example stands 63 centimeters tall with a striking surface diameter and is decorated with images of extraordinary energy and detail. Casting drums of this size required not only mastery of the lost wax technique, but also the ability to melt and pour enormous quantities of bronze in a single operation, a feat that demanded careful furnace design, large supplies of fuel, and precise control of temperature. These drums have been found not only in Vietnam, but across a vast sweep of Southeast Asia, from Laos and Thailand to Myanmar, Malaysia, Cambodia, and Indonesia, with some examples turning up as far away as the islands of the Western Pacific. Their wide distribution tells us about trade networks and shared customs among communities separated by hundreds of kilometers of jungle, mountain, and sea. In some regions, drums in this style continued to be made and used long after the original culture had faded, with later copies produced across the islands of Indonesia that imitate the older designs but differ in their detail. These drums appear to have served many purposes. They were musical instruments for ceremonies and festivals. They were symbols of political authority and social standing. They may have been used in rituals connected with calling rain and ensuring good harvests, and they accompanied the dead into the afterlife as grave offerings. The scenes carved on their surfaces provide a rare visual record of the culture that made them, showing activities like threshing rice, racing longboats, and walking in ceremonial processions. In some parts of Southeast Asia, bronze drums kept their ritual importance well into modern times, used in ceremonies in the highlands of Vietnam, Laos, and Myanmar as recently as the 20th century. The bronze traditions of Southeast Asia were also shaped by a stroke of geological fortune. The region sits atop one of the richest tin belts on Earth, a geological formation stretching from southern China through Myanmar, Thailand, Malaysia, and the islands off the coast of Sumatra. This belt holds the largest deposits of tin-bearing river gravel on the planet, formed over millions of years as tin-rich rock was worn away by tropical rains, and the heavy mineral grains collected in river valleys and along coastlines. This abundance of tin meant that Southeast Asian bronze workers had easy access to one of the two essential ingredients for their craft, in quantities that civilizations around the Mediterranean could only dream of. In Indonesia, bronze work developed its own character, closely tied to the creation of the gamelan, the traditional percussion orchestra of Java and Bali. The gamelan tradition, which produces instruments of extraordinary musical beauty from specially tuned bronze alloys, remains a living art in Indonesia to this day, carried on by families of metalworkers who surround their craft with ritual practices reflecting the sacred status of both the music and the metal that produces it. We will hear more of the gamelan later in our story, when we explore the relationship between bronze and music. The bronze traditions of Southeast Asia have too often been overlooked in stories of the Bronze Age that focus on the Middle East, Egypt, and China. This is a shame because the drums, the gamelan instruments, and the thousands of bronze tools and ornaments found across the region represent a rich and independent tradition of metalwork that deserves to be recognized alongside the more familiar bronze cultures of the ancient world. The region's plentiful tin gave its metalworkers a natural advantage, and they used it to create objects of real beauty and sophistication, objects that continue to resonate in the cultures of modern Southeast Asia. And so, from the tropical forests and river plains of a part of the world that history has sometimes overlooked, we hear the deep voice of bronze sounding out across the centuries, calling us to pay attention. High in the Andes Mountains, sometime around the first 1,000 years before the Common Era, metalworkers in what is now Peru and Bolivia began experimenting with copper alloys that would eventually produce their own form of bronze, entirely independent of anything happening on the other side of the world. These South American smiths had never heard of the Shang dynasty. They had never seen a Mesopotamian weapon. They had never traded for Afghan tin. They arrived at bronze through their own path of trial and discovery, driven by their own needs and shaped by their own resources. The result was a bronze tradition that differed in deep ways from its counterpart in the Old World, both in its recipe and in its meaning. The earliest metal alloy in South America was not tin bronze, but a mixture of copper and arsenic, the same combination that had appeared independently in Western Asia thousands of years earlier. The roots of this metalwork stretch back to the early first millennium before the Common Era, but the clearest evidence of developed skill appears with the Moche people on the northern coast of Peru, who flourished between roughly 200 years before the Common Era and 600 years after. The Moche were remarkable metalworkers who mastered a range of techniques including casting, hammering, and a clever method of making copper-gold objects appear to be solid gold by treating the surface with an acidic solution that dissolved the copper from the outer layer, leaving a gold-rich skin behind. Scientists who have examined Moche objects have found layered surface treatments that rival modern industrial processes in their precision, a quiet testament to how much these ancient craftsmen understood about the behavior of metals. The arsenic bronze used by the Moche and earlier cultures was well suited to the available ores. Arsenic occurs naturally in many of the copper deposits found along the spine of the Andes, so the alloy could be made simply by heating these ores without needing a separate arsenic source. The resulting metal was harder than pure copper and could be formed into more complex shapes. The Moche used it for farming tools, fishhooks, and ceremonial items. They also valued it for its silvery color, which was different from the reddish tone of pure copper and may have carried symbolic meaning. But arsenic bronze had the same grim drawback in South America as it had everywhere else. The fumes released during the work were poisonous, slowly harming the people who made the alloy. Further south, near the shores of a great high-altitude lake in modern Bolivia, the Tiwanaku culture developed a unique approach. Working at an altitude of nearly 4,000 meters, Tiwanaku metalworkers created a distinctive blend of copper, arsenic, and nickel, and used it to produce metal clamps that held together the precisely cut stone blocks of their monumental buildings and pyramids. The use of metal clamps for joining stone is a technique found in only a handful of ancient cultures, and its appearance here represents an independent solution to a universal engineering problem: how to hold massive blocks together without mortar. The most important shift in Andean metalwork came with the rise of the Inca Empire in the 1400s. The Incas adopted tin bronze as their preferred alloy, a sudden and dramatic change from the arsenic bronze traditions that had dominated the region for more than 1,000 years. Tin deposits exist in the Andean highlands, particularly in what is now Bolivia and northwestern Argentina, and the Incas mined them systematically. The speed with which they adopted tin bronze across their rapidly growing empire suggests a deliberate state decision to standardize their metalwork, consistent with the Inca approach to governing, which favored uniformity and central control in most things. Inca tin bronze served many purposes. Bronze knives with their distinctive half-moon blades were used for both surgery and ceremony, and the shape remains a symbol of Peru to this day. Bronze axes, chisels, and farming tools were distributed through the state-controlled economy to workers across the empire. The Inca government managed metal production through a system of state workshops staffed by specialist metalworkers, who produced standard items for distribution along the empire's vast network of roads. The spread of metalworking in the Americas was far more limited than in the Old World. The great civilizations of Mesoamerica, including the Maya and the Aztecs, received knowledge of metalwork from South America only relatively late, probably through sea trade along the Pacific coast sometime after 600 years of the Common Era. And when metal technology did reach Mesoamerica, it arrived in a region that had already built sophisticated civilizations without it, using stone, volcanic glass, jade, and bone for their tools and weapons. Volcanic glass, in particular, could be shaped into blades sharper than modern surgical steel. The result was that metal never achieved the same central importance in Mesoamerican life as it held in the Andes or the Old World. Why the Americas developed bronze so much later than the rest of the world has no single answer. Part of the reason is geography. The American continents run north to south, making the transfer of technologies between regions more difficult than in the Old World, which stretches mostly east to west along similar weather patterns. Part of the reason is the distribution of minerals. While the Americas have plenty of copper, tin is relatively scarce outside the Andean highlands. And part may be cultural. In many American societies, metals were valued primarily for their beauty and spiritual meaning, rather than for practical use, leading to traditions that emphasize decoration and ritual over the making of tools and weapons. Gold and silver, which are useless for practical purposes but magnificent for display, held far higher status in many Andean and Mesoamerican cultures. When the Spanish arrived in the 1500s, they found Andean bronze traditions that were skilled, well-organized, and deeply woven into the social fabric of the Inca Empire. But Spanish steel was harder, sharper, and more versatile than any bronze the Americas had produced. The conquest that followed showed, with devastating clarity, the military advantage that superior metal could bring. A small force of Spanish soldiers defeated an Inca army many times its size, aided in part by steel armor and weapons that Inca bronze simply could not penetrate. The bronze traditions of the Americas, developed independently over more than 2,000 years, were largely swept away within a single generation. But their story is worth remembering, because it shows us that the urge to mix metals, to experiment, to create something stronger and more useful from what the earth provides, is not the property of any one culture. It is something deeply, universally human. Imagine a sculptor in an ancient workshop, perhaps 4,000 years ago, working by the light of oil lamps. In front of her sits a block of beeswax, warmed by the heat of the room to a soft, pliable consistency. She shapes it with her fingers and with simple tools of bone and wood, building up a figure gradually, adding details, smoothing surfaces, pressing in textures that will define the final form. When the wax model is complete, she coats it carefully with fine clay, building up layer after layer, leaving channels for the wax to escape and for the metal to enter. When the clay is dry, the mold goes into the kiln. The wax melts and drains away, leaving a hollow space in the exact shape of the original model. Into that space, she pours molten bronze, liquid metal, the color of fire, and waits for it to cool. When she breaks away the clay, the bronze figure inside is a perfect copy of the wax she shaped, every fingerprint, every tool mark, every detail preserved in metal that will last for thousands of years. This is the lost wax process, and it is one of the oldest and most enduring techniques in all of human history. The oldest known examples of metal objects made this way are gold pieces from a burial ground in Bulgaria, dating to roughly 6,500 years ago. From those early beginnings, the technique spread across the ancient world, or perhaps was invented independently in several places at once, eventually becoming the most important method for creating bronze sculpture in civilizations from West Africa to East Asia. The beauty of the lost wax method lies in its ability to capture forms of nearly unlimited detail. Any shape that can be modeled in wax, no matter how intricate or delicate, can be translated into metal through this process. Stone carving is limited by the brittleness of the material. An outstretched arm or a reaching hand that would snap off a marble statue can stand freely in bronze. Clay modeling is limited by the tendency of wet clay to sag under its own weight. But wax is soft, forgiving, and holds its shape, allowing the artist to achieve effects that no other material can match. And the lost wax process preserves those effects permanently in bronze. The basic steps have remained remarkably consistent across cultures and centuries, though the details vary. In the simplest version, a solid wax model is coated with clay, fired to remove the wax, and filled with metal. The result is a solid bronze casting, heavy and expensive in terms of the metal used. For larger works, a more refined approach is used. A core of clay or sand is formed roughly in the shape of the desired figure, and a thin layer of wax is applied over the core. This wax layer is worked and detailed, then encased in an outer shell of clay. When the mold is heated, the wax melts away through special channels, leaving a thin gap between the inner core and the outer shell. Bronze is poured into this gap, producing a hollow casting that uses far less metal and is much lighter. The network of wax rods attached to the model before the outer shell is applied serves several purposes. When the wax melts, the channels they leave allow it to drain out completely. During casting, some channels guide the molten bronze into the mold, while others let heated air and gases escape. Without proper venting, gas bubbles can get trapped in the bronze, creating weak spots. Designing this system of channels is itself an art, requiring the caster to think ahead about how liquid metal will flow through the mold and to make sure every part fills completely before the bronze begins to harden. After the bronze has cooled and the outer shell has been broken away, the work is far from done. The raw casting must be cleaned up, a painstaking process of smoothing the surface, removing the stumps left by the channels, filling any flaws and sharpening details with hammers, chisels, and files. In many traditions, this finishing work is as important as the casting itself. The best finishers were highly valued craftsmen whose skill could make the difference between an ordinary casting and a masterpiece. After finishing, the surface is treated with various substances to produce the desired color, the final step in a process that may have taken months or even years from the first touch of wax to the finished bronze. The Chinese, as we have already seen, developed a different approach called piece mold casting, which grew up independently of the lost wax tradition. While lost wax casting begins with a unique wax model that is destroyed in the making of the mold, piece mold casting begins with a reusable model from which multiple mold sections can be taken. The two methods represent different solutions to the same problem, turning a three-dimensional design into a permanent metal object, and neither is inherently better than the other. Lost wax is especially good for flowing organic shapes. Piece mold is especially good for sharp geometric patterns. The lost wax method reached extraordinary levels of refinement in different parts of the world. In Benin, in what is now Nigeria, a guild of bronze casters produced memorial heads and wall panels of such technical quality that European collectors were astonished when they first saw them. In South India, families of casters produced bronze figures of Hindu gods using a variation of the method that employed beeswax mixed with natural resins, creating figures of grace and beauty that are considered among the finest sculptures ever made. In Renaissance Italy, artists pushed the technique to new extremes of scale and ambition, casting monumental figures that remain among the highest achievements of Western art. What unites all these traditions is a central paradox. The creation of something permanent depends on the destruction of something temporary. The wax model, the product of the artist's skill and imagination, must be sacrificed to produce the bronze that will carry that skill and imagination into the future. Every lost wax bronze that exists represents a wax original that no longer does, a ghost of the creative process visible only in the metal that replaced it. The sculptor works knowing that the soft thing she shapes today will be destroyed to become the hard thing that endures tomorrow. It is a process that mirrors, in miniature, the deeper story of bronze itself, from fleeting experiment to lasting legacy. Sometime in the 1200s before the Common Era, a metalworker in Anatolia or the Levant heated a lump of iron ore in a charcoal furnace, pushing the temperature higher than earlier generations had managed. What came out was not the gleaming, pourable liquid that copper and bronze produced, but a spongy, rough mass that had to be hammered over and over to squeeze out impurities and form it into something useful. The resulting iron was, by almost every practical measure, worse than good tin bronze. It was softer, it rusted more easily. It could not be cast into complex shapes the way bronze could. Yet this unpromising metal would eventually replace bronze for nearly every practical use, ending an age of technology that had lasted for more than 3,000 years. The question of why iron replaced bronze has a deceptively simple answer. Iron ore is almost everywhere, while tin is found in only a few scattered places. An army equipped with iron weapons might fight with slightly inferior blades, but it could put swords in the hands of hundreds or thousands of soldiers at a fraction of the cost. A farmer with an iron plow worked with a tool that was a little softer, but the tool could be replaced locally, without relying on trade routes stretching thousands of kilometers. In a world where the long-distance networks that supplied tin had become unreliable or had broken down entirely, iron's great advantage was not that it was better, but that it was available. Iron ore could be found in most inhabited regions of the world, making iron the first truly common metal. For a long time, there was a popular belief that the Hittites of ancient Turkey invented ironworking and held a monopoly on the secret, only releasing it when their empire fell. Modern research has largely set that idea aside. Iron objects from before 1200 years before the Common Era have been found in Egypt, the Caucasus, Iran, and India, suggesting that iron working was developing in many places at once rather than being controlled by any single power. A famous iron dagger found in the tomb of the young pharaoh Tutankhamun was actually made from metal that fell from the sky, the iron of a meteorite. What is true is that working iron required higher temperatures and more demanding techniques than working bronze. Copper melts at around 1085 degrees. Bronze melts at around 950. Iron needs at least 1250 degrees just to begin the process, and even then it does not become a flowing liquid but rather a pasty, difficult mass. Turning that mass into useful steel required adding a small amount of carbon through a process that ancient smiths learned only through centuries of patient experimentation. The changeover from bronze to iron was not sudden. It was gradual, and in many parts of the world, the two metals lived side by side for hundreds of years. In Greece, the period after the Bronze Age collapse saw iron slowly gain ground alongside the continued use of bronze. Bronze remained the preferred material for helmets, armor, and shields, while iron was adopted more and more for swords, spear tips, and farming tools. The great Greek poems about ancient warriors composed during this in-between time reflect both metals. Heroes wear bronze armor and carry bronze shields in passages that may preserve memories of an earlier age, while other lines mention iron in ways that suggest growing familiarity with the newer metal. The typical Greek soldier of the 7th century before the Common Era went into battle wearing a bronze helmet, a bronze breastplate, and bronze shin guards, but carrying an iron sword and an iron-tipped spear, a combination that shows how the two metals played different but complementary roles. In Africa, the story took a different turn. Much of the continent south of the Sahara appears to have moved directly from the Stone Age to the Iron Age, without passing through a Bronze Age at all. Evidence from sites in Eastern Africa suggests that iron working there may date back to the 8th century before the Common Era, or even earlier, raising the possibility that it was developed independently. In China, the transition happened later and differently. Chinese bronze casting was reaching its most splendid heights even as iron was beginning to appear. Chinese ironworkers developed the ability to produce liquid iron at very high temperatures centuries before similar technology existed in the West. This meant that Chinese iron could be poured into molds, competing directly with bronze in a way that the softer hammered iron of the West could not. Even so, bronze kept important ceremonial and artistic roles in China for centuries, and bronze coins remained the standard money. The shift to iron had deep effects on the structure of society. Bronze had been a metal of the powerful, its production controlled by rulers who guarded access to tin and kept skilled metalworkers close. Iron changed this. Because iron ore could be found locally in most places, metalwork could be done by village smiths without depending on distant trade routes or royal approval. This spread of capability reduced the ability of rulers to control who had weapons and who did not, and may have helped create the more fragmented political landscape of the early Iron Age. But bronze did not disappear. It simply found new roles. For anything that needed to resist rust, such as objects exposed to water or damp air, bronze remained better than iron. For anything that needed to ring, such as bells and musical instruments, bronze was irreplaceable, its deep, sustained tone unmatched by any iron alloy. For anything that needed to capture fine detail through casting, bronze still had the advantage. And for coins, bronze's durability, attractive appearance, and resistance to corrosion made it the standard metal for everyday money across much of the ancient world. The long farewell between bronze and iron is not, in truth, a farewell at all. Bronze has never stopped being used. It has simply become more specialized, finding roles that iron and steel cannot fill. The shift from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age was not the death of one material and the birth of another, but a rearrangement. The younger metal took over the heavy work of tools and weapons, while the older metal quietly retreated to the places where it was still needed most, in art, in music, in the sea, and in the precision parts of machines yet to be invented. And in those places, bronze has remained not merely useful, but irreplaceable, a testament to the lasting value of humanity's first deliberately created alloy. On a summer day in 1972, a man diving for fun off the coast of Calabria, in the south of Italy, spotted something sticking up from the sandy seabed. He was only about 200 meters from shore, in water barely 8 meters deep. What he had found were two full-size bronze statues of bearded warriors, each standing nearly 2 meters tall, their bodies shaped with a power and naturalism that marked them as products of the classical Greek tradition at its absolute peak. The two figures, known as the Rarest warriors, had lain on the bottom of the sea for more than 2,000 years, lost when the Roman ship carrying them, perhaps as plunder from a Greek city, sank in a storm. Their discovery was one of the great events of 20th century archaeology, because these two statues represent almost the entire surviving legacy of what the ancient world considered the greatest art form ever achieved. The loss is staggering. Ancient writers describe thousands of bronze statues that once filled the temples, public squares, and training grounds of Greek cities. A 2nd century travel writer describes seeing hundreds of bronze figures at the site of Olympia alone, many of them life-size or larger, showing victorious athletes, gods, and heroes. The greatest sculptors of the 5th century before the Common Era, masters who wrote treatises on the ideal proportions of the human body, who created images of discus throwers and striding gods and colossal armed goddesses, whose workshops produced legendary works by the hundred, left behind almost nothing in their original form. The reason is simple and heartbreaking. Bronze is valuable. Throughout history, bronze statues were melted down and turned into coins, weapons, church bells, or newer statues. A single life-size bronze figure contains enough metal to make thousands of coins, making every bronze sculpture a tempting target for any ruler short of cash or raw material. The Roman Empire was especially active in recycling Greek bronzes. The process continued after Rome fell, as medieval authorities melted down the old statues of pagan gods for both their metal and to eliminate images they considered unholy. As a result, our understanding of Greek bronze sculpture comes almost entirely from copies made in marble by Roman craftsmen. The famous discus thrower in London, the spear carrier in Naples, and countless other well-known Greek sculptures are Roman reproductions. They give us the general shape and proportions of the lost originals, but they cannot convey the warmth of the surface, the color of the metal, or the lifelike details that made bronze the preferred medium of Greek artists. Marble copies often include awkward support structures, like tree trunks placed next to a figure's leg, that were unnecessary in the bronze originals. Bronze's strength could hold an outstretched arm or a dramatic pose that marble could never safely support. Fewer than about 12 ancient Greek bronze statues survive in anything close to their original form, and the Rarest warriors are among the finest. Scientific study of the figures has revealed extraordinary skill. They were cast using the lost wax method in multiple separate sections: the torso, the head, the arms and the legs, each cast individually, and then joined together with such care that the seam lines are nearly invisible. Their eyes were originally set with bone and glass paste, creating an unsettlingly lifelike gaze. Their lips were covered with copper to suggest the reddish color of flesh. Their teeth were made of silver. One of them once wore a bronze wreath, now lost, and both originally carried shields and spears that have also vanished. Who made them remains uncertain. Some scholars have suggested that one figure was the work of one great 5th century master, and the other by a different master. Without inscriptions or any surrounding objects to guide us, a definitive answer may never come. But the quality places them firmly in the circle of the greatest sculptors of their age. Greek artists understood bronze with a closeness that marble workers could not match. Bronze allowed for poses that marble could not survive. An arm thrown outward, a body balanced on one foot, a figure caught in violent motion. The internal skeleton of a bronze figure, its framework of iron or wood, could carry the weight of extended limbs and dramatic gestures that marble would crack under. Creating a life-size Greek bronze was a long and costly process. The sculptor first made a full-size clay model. Molds were taken from each section of the body. Each section was cast separately, then trimmed, fitted, and joined to the others through careful welding and fastening. The entire surface was then smoothed, polished, and treated with substances to give it the desired color. A single figure might take months to finish and require the work of several specialized craftsmen: the modeler, the mold maker, the caster, and the finisher who brought the surface to life. The tradition did not end with the classical period. In the centuries following the conquests of Alexander the Great, Hellenistic sculptors pushed bronze in new emotional directions. A bronze figure of an aging fighter, sitting exhausted after a match, his face swollen, his nose broken, his ears thickened with old scars, droplets of blood shown as tiny copper inlays on his face and hands, is one of the most emotionally powerful sculptures of any era. It survived, probably because it was deliberately buried in the ground during the turmoil of late antiquity, and its survival is a stroke of fortune. The Greek bronze tradition shaped the ambitions of every civilization that came after. Roman sculptors studied and copied Greek bronzes. Renaissance artists traveled across Europe to examine the surviving fragments. The equestrian statue, the public monument, the architectural relief all trace their origins to the Greek masters who first showed what the human form could become when translated into metal. That so few of their original works remain is one of the quiet tragedies of human culture. A loss measured not in single objects, but in an entire artistic tradition reduced to echoes and shadows. And yet, those echoes have been powerful enough to inspire artists for more than 2,000 years. On a hilltop in Rome, in a small medieval square, stands the only large bronze horse and rider statue to survive intact from the ancient world. The rider is Marcus Aurelius, emperor and philosopher, seated on a horse that steps forward with patient dignity, his right hand extended in a gesture of address. The statue was cast around 175 years after the Common Era, stands over 4 meters tall, and was once covered in gold leaf, traces of which still cling to the surface in sheltered places. It survived the systematic melting of pagan bronzes during the Middle Ages for one reason only. Someone mistakenly believed the rider was Constantine, the first Christian emperor, and the statue was therefore thought too sacred to destroy. That accident of misidentification saved what would otherwise have become coins or church bells, like the countless other bronze statues that once populated the public spaces of Rome. Ancient sources describe a city absolutely filled with bronze. The Roman writer Pliny, in the 1st century of the Common Era, listed dozens of famous bronze works, and complained that there were so many bronze statues in the Forum that one could hardly walk without bumping into them. The great bronze doors of the Pantheon, one of Rome's most famous buildings, still hang on their original hinges 2,000 years after they were first put in place. The scale of Roman bronze production was enormous. The military alone consumed vast quantities. Soldiers wore bronze helmets, bronze belt buckles, and carried standards cast in bronze and covered in gold. The Roman Navy used bronze for ship fittings and rams. Across the empire, bronze served as the material of infrastructure, used for water pipes, valve gates for aqueducts, and the clamps that held stone blocks together in great buildings. The appetite of Roman households was equally large. The cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, buried by a volcanic eruption in 79 of the Common Era, give us an unmatched picture of bronze in everyday Roman life. Houses contained bronze cooking pots, oil lamps, candelabras with multiple arms, furniture handles and hinges, surgical instruments of surprising precision, mirrors, scrapers for cleaning the body after bathing, and small statues of household gods that stood in niches near the family hearth. Bronze was the material of daily life in the Roman world, as common and essential as any material is in ours. Roman bronze coins formed the backbone of the empire's money system. While gold and silver served the wealthy, bronze coins were the money of ordinary people, used for everyday purchases in markets and taverns from one end of the empire to the other. The earliest Roman coins were heavy bronze discs cast rather than stamped, their value determined by their weight. Over the centuries, Roman coins became smaller, lighter, and more detailed, but bronze remained the everyday money throughout Rome's long history. The great equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius was cast using the lost wax method in multiple sections that were assembled and joined together. The horse and rider together weigh several tons, and the challenges of casting, assembling, and gilding such a massive work were considerable. Roman bronze workers inherited a long tradition stretching back through the Etruscans, the people who had dominated central Italy before Rome's rise and who were skilled metalworkers in their own right. When Rome absorbed Etruscan territory and culture, it absorbed Etruscan metalworking knowledge as well, adding it to the Greek techniques that Roman sculptors were already studying. The production of bronze in the Roman world operated at every scale. Small workshops in cities produced everyday objects for local markets. Larger operations, sometimes attached to military camps, turned out standardized equipment for armies of hundreds of thousands. Copper and tin mining was organized as a state enterprise, with great mines in Spain, on the island of Cyprus, and in Britain producing the raw materials that fed the empire's hunger for bronze. Roman bronze sculpture reached its highest artistic levels in the period between the late Republic and the early Empire, roughly the 1st century before the Common Era through the 2nd century after. Portrait busts captured individual faces with an unflinching honesty that reflected Roman cultural values. Equestrian statues and monumental figures stood in the forums and temples of Rome and its cities abroad. The skill in the best Roman bronzes, the wrinkles of an aging face, the texture of a garment, the veins on a horse's neck, shows a tradition of careful observation that would not be equaled in Europe until the Renaissance, more than 1,000 years later. The decline of the Roman Empire brought a slow decline in bronze production. As the economy shrank and long-distance trade became more difficult, the supply of copper and tin diminished. Older bronzes were increasingly melted down to make new ones, a process that quickened as Christianity became dominant and the old statues of pagan gods lost their protection. An emperor in the 300s ordered the stripping of bronze furnishings from temples across the empire. By the fall of the Western Empire in the 500s, much of Rome's once abundant bronze had been consumed, melted, and remade so many times that the original masterworks existed only in memory. Yet some survived through accident, through burial, through being mistaken for something they were not. The Pantheon's doors still open on their ancient bronze hinges. Marcus Aurelius still extends his hand from his hilltop. And in the buried cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, the bronze objects of ordinary life still tell the story of a civilization that used this ancient alloy with more variety, more skill, and in greater quantities than any that had come before. And so from Rome, the story of bronze continues to unfold, carried forward now not by a single empire but by a world of many cultures, each finding their own way with this versatile and enduring metal. In February of 1897, a British military force of roughly 1,200 soldiers entered the city of Benin, the capital of the Kingdom of Benin in what is now southern Nigeria. They came as a punitive expedition, seeking revenge for the deaths of a British trading party that had been ambushed while trying to enter the city during a period of sacred rituals when outsiders were forbidden. What they found inside the royal palace astonished them. Hanging on the walls and pillars were hundreds of bronze plaques showing court scenes, warriors, hunters, and visiting Portuguese traders. In the shrines and ceremonial chambers stood bronze heads of extraordinary refinement, their surfaces smooth and detailed, their features both idealized and recognizable. The soldiers, who had expected to find what their prejudices told them would be a simple society, were faced with evidence of an artistic tradition that rivaled anything in the European metalworking world. The surprise was considerable. Some officers later described the bronzes as the most unexpected discovery of their military careers. They took everything they could carry. Between 3,000 and 5,000 objects of immense cultural value were removed from the palace and surrounding sites. Some pieces were given to individual officers as personal keepsakes, a casual distribution of another civilization's heritage that seems unthinkable today. The rest were shipped to London and sold at auction to pay for the cost of the military expedition. The bronzes scattered across museums and private collections throughout Europe and North America, where they have remained, in various states of controversy ever since. The bronze casting tradition of Benin was already centuries old by the time the British arrived. According to the oral histories of the Benin court, a visiting craftsman from the neighboring Yoruba kingdom of Ife arrived in the kingdom during the late 1200s, bringing with him the lost wax casting technique and knowledge of copper alloys. Following his arrival, a specialized guild of bronze casters was established under the exclusive patronage of the king, known as the Oba. This guild was the highest ranking of the many craft guilds that operated within the palace, and its members were forbidden, on pain of death, from making bronze works for anyone other than the king. This rule ensured that bronze remained a medium of royal power. Every bronze object produced in the kingdom carried the authority of the throne. The casting reached its peak between the 1400s and the 1600s, a period that coincided with the kingdom's greatest political strength and with the expansion of European sea trade along the West African coast. The plaques that lined the palace walls, of which more than 900 survive, show scenes from court life with a sophistication that suggests formal training and an established visual tradition. Important figures are shown larger and in higher relief than their attendants, a way of indicating rank that is found in the art of many cultures but carried out here with distinctive Benin conventions. The level of detail is quietly remarkable. Individual strands of coral bead necklaces, the weave patterns of ceremonial clothing, the shapes of specific weapons and symbols of office, all are carefully recorded. The commemorative bronze heads, created to honor deceased kings and their mothers, are among the finest portrait sculptures from any African civilization. The earliest examples from the 1300s and 1400s are thin-walled and naturalistic, with sensitive modeling of facial features. Later heads become increasingly elaborate and stylized, with thicker walls and more surface decoration, reflecting changes in both taste and available materials over the centuries. Despite their famous name, most of the Benin bronzes are actually made of brass, a copper-zinc alloy rather than true bronze. The metal was obtained mostly through trade with Europeans, beginning with the Portuguese who arrived in the late 1400s. In exchange for goods, European traders supplied horseshoe-shaped metal bars that Benin casters melted down and recast into their own works. The technical quality of the casting was, and remains, exceptional. The thin-walled pieces produced by the lost wax method show a level of control that impressed even European metalworkers who examined them. Some scholars in the early days refused to believe the bronzes could have been made in Africa, suggesting they must have been the work of European craftsmen. This claim has been thoroughly disproven by the evidence, which shows a continuous local tradition with clear development over centuries. In recent years, the movement to return the Benin bronzes to their place of origin has gained real momentum. Germany returned substantial collections in 2022. The Netherlands returned more than 100 pieces. American institutions have begun their own processes. But the situation is complicated by questions of who exactly should receive the returned objects, and by the reluctance of some institutions whose rules make it difficult to permanently give up parts of their collections to let them go. The living tradition of bronze casting in Benin City has survived through all of this. After the 1897 invasion, many court craftsmen fled. But when the royal line was restored in 1914, guild members began returning and resuming their work. Today, on a street in Benin City, bronze casters continue to practice their art, producing works that maintain the techniques of their ancestors while adapting to the present day. Visitors can watch artisans at every stage of the process, from shaping wax to preparing clay molds to the dramatic moment when the molten metal is poured. The tradition was recognized by the United Nations in 2007 as an important living heritage of humanity. The story of the Benin Bronzes is, at its heart, a story about the power of bronze itself, its ability to hold authority, to record history, and to survive the forces that destroyed the civilization that created it. The bronzes have outlasted the kingdom, the colonial empire that took them, and the assumptions of superiority that once led some to deny their African origin. They remain in museums and in the workshops of their home city as evidence that the art of bronze casting belongs not to any single people but to all of humanity. In 1978, archaeologists opened the tomb of a Chinese nobleman who had died around 430 years before the Common Era, and what they found inside made the modern world hear the ancient one. The tomb contained a complete set of 65 bronze bells, arranged in 3 tiers on a massive L-shaped wooden frame, stretching over 7 meters in length. The total weight of the set was more than 2.5 tons. When the bells were cleaned and tested, they produced notes of astonishing clarity, spanning 5 full octaves, a range comparable to a modern piano. And here is the detail that makes this set truly extraordinary. Each bell, thanks to its distinctive almond-shaped profile rather than the round shape of Western bells, could produce 2 different musical notes depending on where it was struck. The 2 notes, typically separated by a specific musical interval, were achieved through the deliberate shaping of the bell's body to create 2 separate patterns of vibration. Music that had not been heard for nearly 2,500 years suddenly filled a modern laboratory, bridging the centuries with sound. These sets of tuned bronze bells represent the meeting point of metalwork, music, and political power in ancient China. The oldest known bronze bells without clappers in China date to roughly 2,100 years before the Common Era. But the practice of organizing them into precisely tuned sets developed during the following centuries. These bells were not for entertainment. They were for ritual, used in elaborate court ceremonies that communicated with ancestral spirits and reinforced the authority of the ruling house. To own a set was to possess both the wealth to commission them and the rank to perform the ceremonies they required. The number of bells was tied to status. A lesser lord might own a set of 9. Only a great ruler could command 65. The reason bronze is so uniquely suited for bells comes down to how the metal vibrates. When struck, a bronze bell produces a complex tone with a strong bass note and a rich set of higher overtones that fade slowly, creating the deep, sustained sound that we associate with bells. A pure copper disc would produce a dull, short-lived thud. A pure tin disc would crack. But the alloy of the 2, in just the right proportions, creates a material that truly rings. The ideal recipe for bell bronze, typically around 77 to 80% copper and 20 to 23% tin, was discovered independently by bell makers in China, Europe, and Southeast Asia, each arriving at a similar answer to the same question. In Europe, the art of making bells developed hand in hand with the Christian Church. The earliest European church bells were crude affairs made of hammered iron, with poor tone and limited volume. By the 700s, bronze casting had been adopted, producing instruments that were louder, more musical, and easier to tune. The bell became the voice of the church, calling people to prayer, marking the hours of the day, ringing for funerals, and pealing for celebrations. Church bells were often given names and blessed in special ceremonies, treated almost as living members of the community. The great bells of Europe were among the largest bronze objects ever cast. The Great Bell at the Palace of Westminster in London, commonly known by a familiar nickname, weighs about 13.5 tons and was cast in 1858. The largest bell ever made sits in Moscow, cast in 1735. It weighs roughly 202 tons and stands over 6 meters tall. It cracked during a fire before it could ever be raised to its tower and has never been rung. A broken piece weighing 11 tons lies beside it to this day, a monument to ambition that exceeded what the metal could bear. In Japan, the bronze bell tradition took different forms. The earliest Japanese bronze bells, dating to a period beginning roughly 300 years before the Common Era, were not musical instruments in the usual sense. They were thin-walled, often too fragile for repeated striking, and many show no signs of ever having been used to make sound. Instead, they seem to have served as ritual objects buried in the earth away from settlements, perhaps as offerings to gods of farming or as markers of territory. Their surfaces are decorated with scenes of daily life animals and geometric patterns that provide a precious glimpse into a time for which no written records exist. The great temple bells of Japan are a later and separate tradition. Cast in bronze using techniques brought from China and Korea, these massive bells hang in open towers at Buddhist temples. They are struck with a horizontal wooden beam rather than an internal clapper, producing a deep, resonant tone that carries across great distances. The sound of a temple bell at dawn or dusk is one of the most evocative sounds in Japanese culture, tied to meditation, the passage of time, and the impermanence of all things. On New Year's Eve, the bells of Japanese temples are struck 108 times, once for each of the worldly troubles that Buddhist teaching says are the sources of human suffering. Perhaps no bell in history carries as much symbolic weight as the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. Cast in London in 1752, it was made of roughly 70% copper and 25% tin, with the remainder a mixture of trace metals. It cracked upon its very first test ringing after arriving in America, apparently too brittle in its makeup. 2 local metalworkers recast it twice, adding extra copper to reduce the brittleness and putting their own names on the bell for all to see. Despite their efforts, the bell developed its famous large crack sometime in the early to mid-1800s, with the final expansion that silenced it for good happening in 1846. The Liberty Bell's crack is, in a way, the source of much of its power as a symbol. An uncracked bell would simply be a bell. A cracked bell that can never ring again becomes something more, a quiet image of a promise not yet fully kept. The bronze, flawed and silent, speaks more clearly in its silence than it ever could in sound. Across cultures and centuries, bronze bells have served as instruments of community, authority, and something deeper. They have called people to prayer, marked the hours of working days, warned of danger, and celebrated moments of joy and sorrow. The particular way that bronze vibrates, its long sustain, its layered harmonics, its ability to send sound over great distances, makes it the only metal truly suited to this purpose. In a world of electronic chimes and digital alarms, the bronze bell remains irreplaceable, its voice still carrying the weight of tradition and the craft of ages. In the spring of 1453, a Hungarian cannon engineer named Orban stood before Sultan Mehmed II of the Ottoman Empire and offered his services. Orban had first approached the Byzantine emperor with the same offer, but the emperor could not afford his fee and could not provide the vast quantities of bronze the designs required. Mehmed, who was preparing to attack the 1,000-year-old walls of Constantinople and had access to the wealth of the entire Ottoman state, had no such difficulty. He paid Orban well and set him to work building the largest cannon the world had ever seen. The result was a monster of cast bronze that stretched roughly 8 meters in length, with a bore wide enough for a person to crawl inside and walls of solid bronze as thick as a person's forearm. The cannon could fire stone balls weighing more than half a ton, though it could only be fired about 7 times a day because each shot required hours of cooling and reloading. It was so enormous that it needed 60 oxen and 200 men to move it from the foundry to the battlefield. a journey of 200 kilometers that took weeks, with crews going ahead to strengthen bridges and widen roads. On April 12th of that year, this great cannon roared for the first time against the walls of Constantinople, the double ring of fortifications that had protected the city for more than 1,000 years and had turned back every siege in its history. The stone balls shattered the outer wall on impact. The cannon itself cracked after several weeks of firing, worn out by the tremendous forces of its own blasts. But by then, the damage was done. Over the following weeks, a battery of Ottoman cannon pounded the walls without rest, opening gaps that the defenders struggled to repair each night. On May 29th, Ottoman forces surged through the breaches and Constantinople fell. The Byzantine Empire, the last remnant of ancient Rome, died that day, killed in large part by bronze. The use of bronze for cannon was not an Ottoman invention. The earliest cannons developed in China during the 1200s were made of cast iron or bamboo, reinforced with iron strips. When cannon technology spread westward during the 1300s, bronze quickly became the preferred material for serious weapons. The reasons were both practical and rooted in the nature of the metal itself. Bronze could be cast into the long, tubular shapes that cannon barrels needed, using the same techniques that founders had perfected over thousands of years. It resisted the corrosive effects of gunpowder residue, which ate through iron quickly. And most importantly, bronze was less likely to fail in a sudden, catastrophic way. When a bronze barrel reached the end of its life, it usually developed visible cracks that warned the crew. An iron cannon was more likely to explode without warning, killing the people around it in a blast of flying metal fragments. This predictability of failure made bronze the safer choice, a consideration that weighed heavily with the professional gunners who stood beside each firing. The mixture of metals used for cannon was specific and carefully controlled. The alloy typically contained roughly 88 to 90% copper, 8 to 10% tin, and small amounts of other metals. This composition produced a metal strong enough to contain the pressures of firing, flexible enough to absorb the shock of repeated blasts without cracking, and smooth enough to bore out to the precise inner dimensions that accuracy required. Too little tin and the cannon would be too soft, bending under pressure. Too much and it would be brittle, shattering apart. Experienced cannon founders knew the ideal mixture by tradition and by instinct, testing each batch by its sound, its color, and how it behaved during casting. Casting a large bronze cannon was one of the most demanding tasks a metalworker could take on. The barrel had to be cast as a single piece, without any joins or seams that could become points of weakness. The mold had to be perfectly straight and even. The bronze had to be poured at precisely the right temperature and allowed to cool slowly and evenly. After casting, the inside of the barrel was finished by turning it on a large machine, a process that could take days or weeks for a heavy piece. The cost was enormous, and it placed the technology firmly in the hands of wealthy governments. A single large bronze cannon could cost as much as a small warship. A full siege train of dozens of cannon represented an investment that only the most powerful rulers could afford. This economic reality helped shape the political map of early modern Europe and the Ottoman Empire, concentrating military power in the hands of centralized states with enough money to maintain artillery parks. The great monarchies of France, Spain, England, and the Ottoman Empire could afford standing batteries of cannon. Smaller rulers could not. In this way, bronze cannon helped speed the concentration of political power that marked the early modern world. Bronze cannon reached their peak during the 1500s and 1600s. European foundries and the great Ottoman cannon workshops produced pieces of exceptional quality, and bronze artillery was the standard weapon on both land and sea. The great warships of the era carried rows of bronze guns on multiple decks, their combined weight measured in dozens or hundreds of tons. When one of these ships was recovered from the seabed centuries later, the bronze guns were found still in their positions, the metal surviving while the wood around them had long since rotted away. The eventual decline of bronze cannon in favor of iron was driven by cost. Cast iron cannon, while heavier and more dangerous to their crews, were far cheaper to make. As the quality of iron improved during the 16 and 1700s, the gap between iron and bronze narrowed, and the price advantage of iron became decisive. By the 1800s, bronze had been largely replaced for frontline military use, succeeded first by iron and then by steel. Yet bronze cannon did not vanish entirely. Lighter bronze guns were still used by mountain troops who needed weapons light enough to carry by mule over rough terrain well into the late 1800s. And in ceremonial settings, bronze cannon continue to serve today, their deep, booming voice marking state occasions and military funerals with a gravity that no other material can match. The bronze cannon sits at a curious crossroads in our story. The same alloy that had been used to cast ritual vessels in ancient China and dancing figures in the Indus Valley was now being used to demolish fortifications and sink ships. The technique was essentially unchanged. Melt the metal, pour it into a mold, let it cool, finish the surface. But the purpose had been utterly transformed from art and worship to destruction and conquest. In a small town in Tamil Nadu in the south of India, a man named Radhakrishna shapes a figure of the god Shiva from a mixture of beeswax and natural resin. His hands know the proportions by instinct, guided by texts on sculpture that his family has followed for 34 generations, an unbroken line of bronze casters stretching back to the height of the Chola Empire nearly 1,000 years ago. When the wax model is complete, he will coat it in layers of finely ground clay, fire the mold to melt out the wax, and pour in a molten blend of 5 metals, copper, tin, zinc, gold and silver, the traditional recipe for sacred bronzes in South India. When the clay mold is broken away, the bronze figure inside will be unique, the mold destroyed in the act of creation. Every detail of the master's work preserved in metal that will last for centuries. This is the same method that produced the bronze sculptures of the Chola dynasty, a body of work that many art historians consider the finest bronze sculpture ever created by any civilization, anywhere in the world. The Chola Empire controlled much of southern India and parts of Southeast Asia from roughly the 9th to the 13th century of the Common Era. It was a maritime and military power of the first order, its navy reaching across the Bay of Bengal, its armies conquering territory from the island of Sri Lanka to the Malay Peninsula. But its most enduring legacy is not its conquests, but its bronzes, particularly the images of Hindu gods that were carried in procession through the streets of Tamil temples and that now hold places of honor in museums around the world. The greatest of all Chola bronzes, and perhaps the single greatest bronze sculpture ever made, is the image of Shiva as the lord of the dance. In this form, Shiva dances within a ring of flames, one foot planted on a small figure representing ignorance, the other foot raised in a gesture of liberation. His 4 arms hold a small drum that beats the rhythm of creation, a tongue of flame representing destruction, while one hand extends in a gesture of protection and another points toward the raised foot, signifying release from the endless cycle of life and death. The figure is at once in motion and perfectly balanced, its energy frozen in bronze, yet somehow conveying the continuous movement of a cosmic dance that creates, sustains, and destroys the universe in an endless rhythm. A modern physicist once noted the parallel between this ancient image and the modern understanding of matter, in which the smallest particles are never still, but always in ceaseless motion. A bronze version of this dancing figure stands today outside the European Centre for Physics Research in Geneva, a gift from the Indian government, a bridge between ancient art and modern science. The technical skill of the Chola bronze casters was extraordinary. Working with the lost wax method, they produced figures of remarkable smoothness and grace, with surfaces so refined and proportions so precise that they seem almost impossible for handmade objects. The warm golden brown color of freshly cast Chola bronze suited the curves of the human form in ways that cold stone or painted wood could not. and the weight of the metal gave the figures a physical presence that enhanced their spiritual authority. A large Chola bronze of Shiva or his consort could weigh several hundred kilograms, requiring teams of men to carry it during temple processions. The making of a Chola bronze was governed by sacred texts that specified the exact proportions for each deity. One important text prescribes a system of measurement based on the face length of the figure, determining the relationships between every part of the body, the height in relation to the width of the face, the length of the arms relative to the torso, the size of the hands in relation to the feet. The sculptor's skill lay not in straying from these proportions, but in bringing them to life, in transforming mathematical rules into breathing form. The Chola bronze tradition was not limited to Shiva. Figures of many other gods and goddesses were produced in enormous numbers for the temples that the Chola kings built and supported across their lands. These bronzes served a specific purpose in religious life. During festivals, the stone images that normally stood in the inner room of the temple were considered too sacred and too heavy to move. So bronze copies, called processional images, were carried through the streets on elaborate platforms, accompanied by musicians, dancers, and crowds of worshippers. The procession of a bronze god through the streets of a Chola-era town was one of the great public events of medieval Indian life, and similar processions continue in Tamil Nadu to this day. These bronzes were not merely beautiful objects. In Hindu belief, a properly consecrated image is not a picture of a god, but the god itself, dwelling in the metal form through a special ritual of infusion. The bronze figure was bathed, dressed in silk, decorated with flowers, offered food and incense, and spoken to in prayer. It was treated in every way as a living divine being. This belief gave the bronze caster's work a significance beyond mere craftsmanship. To cast a bronze image of a god was to create a home for the divine, a responsibility that demanded not only technical skill but spiritual purity. The tradition did not end with the Chola dynasty. When the empire declined in the 1300s, the bronze casting skills of Tamil craftsmen were preserved and passed down through family lines and guild structures, continuing through the centuries into the modern era. Today, roughly 200 families in the town of Swamimalai still practice the traditional craft, producing bronzes for temples across India and for collectors around the world. In 2023, the living strength of this tradition was shown on a global stage when a 27-foot bronze of the dancing Shiva, cast in Swamimalai using traditional methods, was installed at the meeting of world leaders in New Delhi. The statue, the largest of its kind ever made, was produced by the same families who have been casting bronzes there for more than 1,000 years. It is a quietly remarkable thing, this unbroken thread of skill and devotion, connecting a man shaping beeswax in a small Indian town today to the unknown masters who first gave Shiva his cosmic dance in bronze a millennium ago. In a museum in the Italian city of Pisa stands a bronze creature that defies easy description. It is a mythical beast, part eagle and part lion, standing over a meter tall and weighing several hundred kilograms. Its surface is covered with intricate geometric patterns and swirling designs that create a shimmering, almost fabric-like texture across the metal. For centuries, it perched atop the Cathedral of Pisa, a familiar part of the city skyline, believed by most people to be a local Italian creation. It was not until modern analysis that the truth emerged. This creature was made in Islamic Spain, sometime around the year 1100 in a workshop near the city of Córdoba. Its metal mixture matches the practices of craftsmen in that region. It is the largest known metal sculpture from the medieval Islamic world, and its presence on a Christian cathedral in Italy tells a story about the medieval Mediterranean that we do not always hear. A story of objects crossing religious and political borders with a freedom that people themselves often could not. This single piece embodies the extraordinary metalworking tradition of the medieval Islamic world, a tradition that brought together techniques from Greek, Persian, Central Asian, and Arab sources into something entirely its own. Islamic craftsmen working in bronze and brass produced objects of a technical quality and beauty that set the standard for metalwork across the medieval world. From scientific instruments to incense burners, from water jugs to candlesticks, the bronze and brass objects of this period represent a high point in the decorative arts. Perhaps the most characteristic bronze object of Islamic civilization is the astrolabe, a portable instrument for observing and calculating the positions of the stars and sun. Although the basic idea was known in the ancient Greek world, it was Muslim astronomers and instrument makers who refined it into the most versatile scientific tool of the medieval age. They added scales and extra plates that allowed a single instrument to be used across different locations. A skilled user could tell the time by day or night, find the direction of Mecca for prayer, predict eclipses, and solve a wide range of problems in the mathematics of the heavens. Most were made of brass, and the finest were decorated with beautiful lettering, geometric patterns, and occasionally figures of humans or animals. One remarkable example from the 1100s carries inscriptions in both Arabic and Hebrew, evidence that it was adapted and corrected by Muslim, Jewish, and Christian users over the centuries as it passed through different hands across Spain, North Africa, and Italy. Each owner added notes and corrections, creating a layered record of scientific knowledge that crossed the boundaries between faiths. The brass instrument served as a common ground where scholars of different religions could work together on the shared project of understanding the sky. The Byzantine Empire, the eastern continuation of Rome, maintained its own distinctive bronze tradition throughout the medieval period. Byzantine craftsmen produced elaborate bronze doors for churches, decorated with relief panels showing saints, emperors, and scenes from the Bible. The practice of making ornate bronze doors spread from Byzantium to Italy, where the doors of several cathedrals were made by Byzantine craftsmen or by Italian artists working in the Byzantine style. Byzantine workshops also produced bronze objects for religious worship, including incense holders, lamps, crosses, and containers for sacred relics, all serving the elaborate ceremonial life of the Eastern Church. The quality of Byzantine bronze work was high, drawing on a continuous tradition that stretched back through the Roman Empire to the Greek workshops of the Classical Age. Islamic metal workers developed distinctive techniques that set their work apart. The art of setting thin wires or sheets of silver, gold, or copper into channels cut in a bronze surface created objects of remarkable visual richness. This method, perfected in workshops across the Islamic world from northern Iraq to Syria to Egypt to Afghanistan, produced some of the most beautiful metal objects of the medieval period. The craftsmen would carve shallow channels in the bronze, then hammer thin wires of precious metal into those channels, creating patterns that contrasted the warm tones of bronze with the bright flash of silver or the warmth of gold. A water jug made in northern Iraq in 1232, now in a London museum, is covered in elaborate silver and copper designs showing courtly scenes, symbols of the heavens, and flowing script. It stands as a masterwork of this art of inlay. The Fatimid dynasty, which ruled Egypt and parts of North Africa from the 900s to the 1100s, was an especially important patron of bronze and brass casting. Fatimid metalworkers produced animal-shaped vessels, including lions, eagles, and mythical beasts that served as containers for water, incense, or perfume. These pieces, cast using the lost wax method and often decorated with engraved or inlaid patterns, blended natural animal forms with Islamic geometric decoration in a style that influenced metalwork across the wider Mediterranean. The exchange of metalwork between the Islamic world, Byzantium, and Western Europe was wide and mutually enriching. Islamic bronze and brass objects were prized in European courts and churches. Many pieces that survive in European collections today were originally imported as luxury goods or diplomatic gifts. The bronze creature in Pisa is merely the most dramatic example of something common: Islamic metalwork used and displayed in Christian settings, its original inscriptions and decorations either misunderstood or quietly overlooked by its European owners. The bronze and brass traditions of the Byzantine and Islamic worlds serve as a vital link in the long chain of metalworking history that connects the ancient world to what came next. The techniques developed and perfected in Constantinople, Damascus, Cairo, and Cordoba, including casting inlay work, engraving, and the making of precision instruments, were passed along through trade, migration, and conquest to the workshops of medieval and Renaissance Europe. There they would combine with local traditions to produce the next great chapter in the story of bronze, the one that begins with a pair of enormous doors in a German cathedral and ends with the glittering brilliance of Renaissance Florence. In the year 1015, a bishop named Bernward in the German city of Hildesheim commissioned a pair of bronze doors for his church that would become one of the masterpieces of medieval art. Bernward was no ordinary churchman. He was a tutor to the young emperor, a skilled metalworker himself who kept a workshop in his own residence, and a man of wide learning who had recently returned from a pilgrimage to Rome, where he had seen ancient carved doors depicting scenes from the Bible. Inspired by what he saw, he decided to create something similar for his own church, but in a far more lasting and impressive material. The result was two enormous panels of cast bronze, each standing nearly 5 meters tall, showing 8 narrative scenes. One door depicts episodes from the book of Genesis, from the creation of the world to the first murder. The other shows scenes from the life of Christ, from the announcement of his birth to his resurrection. They were each cast in a single piece, a feat that required melting and pouring several hundred kilograms of bronze in one operation using the lost wax technique. They remain the oldest surviving large-scale bronze doors, with figured decoration north of the Alps, the first castings of that size in the region since the fall of Rome. The Bernward doors mark a dramatic return of large-scale bronze casting to Western Europe after a gap of many centuries. During the early medieval period, the knowledge and equipment needed to produce big bronze castings had largely faded in the West, surviving only in Byzantium and the Islamic world. The cultural revival that accompanied the Saxon emperors in the 900s and 1000s created the conditions for this comeback, bringing together political ambition, church sponsorship, and the technical expertise needed to attempt something so demanding. Building furnaces large enough to melt the required amounts of bronze, constructing molds that could contain the liquid metal, managing the cooling to prevent cracking. All of this had to be learned or relearned. The success of the project made Hildesheim a center of bronze casting and inspired similar doors across medieval Europe for the next 4 centuries. The tradition spread quickly. In the following centuries, bronze doors were commissioned for churches and cathedrals in Poland, Germany, Russia, Italy, and many other places. Several were made by Byzantine craftsmen or by local workers trained in the Byzantine style, bringing the technical knowledge of Constantinople's workshops to Western European projects. The bronze doors of a great cathedral in Sicily, cast in the late 1100s, blend Western storytelling with Byzantine decorative techniques, reflecting the cultural blending that made Norman Sicily one of the most creative places of the medieval world. Beyond doors, medieval European bronze workers produced other important objects. Baptismal fonts, the large basins used for the Christian sacrament of baptism, were among the most prestigious commissions a bronze founder could receive. One particularly fine example, made in what is now Belgium around 1100, sits in a church supported by 12 bronze oxen representing the 12 apostles. Its surface is decorated with scenes of baptism rendered in flowing relief that shows a naturalism and grace anticipating the art of the Renaissance by several centuries. Bronze tomb effigies became an important art form, particularly in England. The practice of placing a bronze or brass figure on the grave of a deceased nobleman or church leader began in the 1200s and continued for several hundred years. The figures typically showed the deceased lying with hands clasped in prayer, wearing the clothing and carrying the symbols of their rank. Hundreds of these memorial pieces survive in English churches, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of feet walking over them. They provide a wonderful record of medieval clothing, symbols, and social status. The crowning achievement of the medieval bronze door tradition came in Florence, where an artist named Lorenzo Ghiberti spent 27 years, from 1425 to 1452, creating a pair of gilded bronze doors for the eastern entrance of the city's baptistry. The doors contain 10 relief panels showing scenes from the Old Testament, carved with a command of depth, anatomy, and storytelling that earned them an enduring nickname. When the artist Michelangelo saw them, he reportedly declared them worthy of being the gates of paradise, and the name has stayed ever since. Each panel uses multiple layers of depth, from nearly flat background buildings to figures that project almost fully from the door surface, creating an illusion of space that was revolutionary for relief sculpture. Ghiberti borrowed the newly discovered principles of perspective from painting and applied them to metalwork, making architectural settings that seemed to recede convincingly into the distance, an advance that transformed what relief sculpture could do. Ghiberti's achievement grew from a culture of competition. His commission came after he had already spent 20 years making an earlier pair of doors for the same building, a job he had won in a famous competition in 1401 against several rivals, including the young architect Brunelleschi. The competition panels submitted by both men survive and can be seen side by side in a Florence museum, offering a rare chance to watch two brilliant minds solving the same artistic problem. That both chose to work in bronze for this contest reflects how central the metal was to the artistic life of late medieval and early Renaissance Italy. These gilded doors mark the bridge between the medieval bronze tradition and the Renaissance revolution that was about to follow. In their blend of technical mastery, artistic ambition, and narrative skill, they look back to the great bronze doors of Hildesheim and Byzantium and forward to the monumental sculptures that the next generation of artists would create. Bronze, which had served medieval Europe chiefly as a material for church objects and architectural fittings, was about to become the preferred medium for the most ambitious sculptures the Western world had ever attempted. And that story begins, as so many stories in our journey have begun, with a single figure standing in a courtyard, waiting to be seen. In the 1440s, in a courtyard of the Medici Palace in Florence, a bronze sculpture was placed on display that shocked the city. It showed the biblical hero David as a nude young man, standing with one foot on the severed head of the giant Goliath, his body relaxed in an elegant pose that echoed the statues of ancient Greece. It was the first freestanding nude male sculpture made in Europe since the days of the Roman Empire, a statement of artistic ambition and cultural rebirth that declared the classical past had been recovered. The sculptor was Donatello, and the material was essential to the work's power. Only bronze, with its ability to support extended poses, could have brought his vision to life. The wide brim of a hat, a sword held loosely at the figure's side, a long feather trailing up the inside of the leg. All of these details depend on bronze's strength in holding thin, projecting forms that marble could never sustain. The statue announced that the art of the ancients had been reborn, and bronze was the material in which that rebirth would be expressed. The Italian Renaissance, stretching roughly from the 1300s through the 1500s, witnessed an explosion of bronze sculpture that transformed the medium from a craft tradition into a vehicle for individual artistic genius. The sculptors who led this change were not merely skilled workers. They were something new, artist celebrities whose creations were discussed, debated, and celebrated across Europe. The competitive culture of the Renaissance, in which wealthy patrons commissioned works specifically to match or outdo existing masterpieces, drove bronze sculpture to levels of ambition that had not been attempted since the classical age. No account of Renaissance bronze would be complete without the story of Benvenuto Cellini and his great statue of Perseus holding the head of Medusa. Cellini was a goldsmith, sculptor, soldier, and writer, whose autobiography is one of the great literary works of the 1500s. Commissioned in 1545, the statue took 9 years to complete, a timeline extended by enormous technical difficulties, by interruptions including legal troubles that forced the artist to flee to Venice, and by his own perfectionism. The casting of the Perseus nearly ended in disaster. Cellini described how the furnace failed during the critical pour, the bronze beginning to harden before it had filled the entire mold. In a moment of inspired desperation, he threw all the pewter plates from his household, roughly 200 pieces, into the furnace, adding metal to the mixture and raising the temperature just enough to finish the pour. Whether this account is entirely true or polished for dramatic effect, it captures the essential excitement of large-scale bronze casting, the moment when months or years of work hang on the behavior of liquid metal flowing through a mold. Cellini also described collapsing from exhaustion and fever during the casting, then being roused from his sickbed by a workman's cry that the bronze had gone wrong, at which point he leapt up and drove his assistants forward until the casting was saved. The finished Perseus stands in the political heart of Florence, in a covered gallery alongside other masterworks. Its placement was deliberate. The patron, Cosimo de' Medici, commissioned it to stand among the works of earlier masters, a declaration that the art of his era could match the achievements of any generation. The figure was cast in multiple sections. The body, the head, the sword, and the body of Medusa, each done separately, and then assembled with precision. Individual strands of Medusa's serpent hair, the veins on the hero's arms, the expression on the severed head, all are rendered with a clarity that shows complete mastery of the lost wax method. Andrea del Verrocchio, who taught the young Leonardo da Vinci, created one of the great Renaissance bronze monuments, an equestrian statue of a military commander in Venice. Cast after Verrocchio's death by a local founder, it shows the rider on a powerful horse, his face set in an expression of commanding authority. The influence of the ancient Roman statue of Marcus Aurelius is clear in the composition, but Verrocchio added a new energy, with the horse stepping forward aggressively and the rider turning slightly as though surveying a battlefield. This statue established the model for horse and rider monuments that would spread across Europe for the next 4 centuries. Giambologna, born in Flanders but working in Florence during the second half of the 1500s, pushed the boundaries of Renaissance sculpture into new territory. His bronze figure of the messenger god Mercury, balanced on 1 foot atop a gust of wind, is a masterpiece of suggested weightlessness. The heavy bronze somehow made to look as if it could float away at any moment. The engineering of the figure, which is essentially balanced on a single point of contact through the tip of one toe, required extraordinary skill in both design and casting. Giambologna also pioneered the production of small bronze figures, typically between 20 and 60 centimeters tall, that were eagerly collected by wealthy patrons across Europe. These smaller works made bronze sculpture available to a wider audience and created a market for collectible bronzes that continues to this day. The Renaissance bronze tradition depended on a supporting world of foundries, metalworkers, and suppliers that is often invisible behind the fame of the sculptors. A major bronze sculpture required not only the artist who designed it, but the mold makers who translated the design into wax and clay, the founders who managed the casting, the finishers who smoothed the surface, and the specialists who applied the final coloring. Many of the greatest Renaissance bronzes were produced through collaborations between artists and foundries that are not fully recorded, and questions about who deserves the credit continue to occupy scholars. The legacy of Renaissance bronze stretches far beyond Italy. The techniques and ideas developed in the workshops of Florence, Venice, and Rome spread across Europe through traveling artists and the exchange of knowledge, shaping bronze sculpture in France, Germany, the Low Countries, Spain, and eventually the Americas. The idea that bronze could carry individual artistic vision rather than simply serving the needs of religious or political patrons was a Renaissance invention that permanently changed the relationship between artists, materials, and the people who looked at their work. And with that change, bronze entered its modern age, a material no longer bound to any single purpose but open to whatever a creative mind could imagine. On a hillside in the city of Kamakura, south of Tokyo, sits a bronze figure that has been watching the changing seasons for nearly 800 years. The Great Buddha of Kamakura depicts the Buddha of infinite light, seated in meditation with hands resting in his lap. Cast around 1252, the statue stands over 13 meters tall and weighs roughly 93 tons. It was originally sheltered inside a large wooden temple hall, but a series of devastating storms and a tsunami in 1498 destroyed the building, leaving the Buddha exposed to the open air. For more than 5 centuries since, the Great Buddha has sat under the sky, its surface developing a distinctive green coating that has become part of its identity. The statue's serene expression, unchanged by weather, war, or the passage of centuries, embodies the Buddhist ideal of calm in the face of impermanence, a message made more powerful by the very impermanence that destroyed the temple around it while leaving the bronze figure untouched. Japan's relationship with bronze stretches back more than 2,000 years, and it begins with objects that are quite unlike the weapons and tools found in most other Bronze Age cultures. The earliest Japanese bronzes are bell-shaped objects from a period beginning roughly 300 years before the Common Era. These bells are believed to have developed from small Korean bronze bells worn by horses and other animals, but in Japan they grew into something entirely different, large, thin-walled, elaborately decorated objects that were apparently not used to make music at all. Many of these early bells show no signs of wear from being struck, and they were typically found buried in isolated spots on hillsides, far from any settlement. Their purpose remains a mystery. Some scholars think they were offerings to spirits of the land or markers of territory. More than 600 have been discovered across Western Japan, some buried in groups. Their surfaces carry images of rice cultivation, deer hunting, fishing, and community life, providing some of the earliest visual records of daily existence in Japan from a time that left no written accounts. The arrival of Buddhism in Japan in the 6th century of the Common Era transformed the island's bronze tradition. Buddhist sculpture required large-scale casting to produce the monumental images that graced temple interiors, and this demanded new levels of skill. The earliest Japanese Buddhist bronzes followed Korean and Chinese models closely, but Japanese craftsmen quickly developed their own style, combining outside influences with a sensitivity to surface texture and emotional expression that became distinctly their own. The first great age of Japanese Buddhist bronze was the Nara period, roughly 710 to 794, which produced the enormous Great Buddha at the Temple of Todaiji, originally cast in 752. This seated figure, roughly 15 meters tall, consumed an immense quantity of copper and tin, reportedly using most of the copper available in the country at the time. The Great Buddha of Kamakura represents a later phase of this tradition, reflecting the aesthetic preferences of a warrior culture. Where the Nara Buddha is solemn and formal, the Kamakura Buddha is gentler, its expression more approachable, its proportions slightly more natural. The statue was cast in multiple sections, probably using piece mold techniques, and assembled on site. Modern study has identified about 30 separate cast sections joined together with pins and solder. The interior is hollow, and visitors today can enter through a small door in the back and see the joined lines from the inside, a rare chance to examine medieval Japanese casting from within. Japanese bronze art extended well beyond Buddhist statues. Bronze mirrors, originally brought from China, became deeply important in Japanese culture, associated with divinity, truth, and the imperial family. One of the 3 sacred objects of the Japanese imperial house is a bronze mirror, kept at the most revered shrine in the Shinto religion and never shown to the public. Its significance comes from a myth in which the sun goddess was coaxed from hiding by her own reflection in a bronze mirror, restoring light to the world. In the world of the samurai, bronze played a supporting but culturally rich role. While Japanese swords were made of steel, the fittings that adorned them were often crafted from bronze or related alloys. The handguard, the grip ornaments, and the end caps of the handle were miniature masterworks of metalcraft, decorated with scenes from nature, mythology, or literature. A single handguard by a recognized master could be worth more than the sword blade it adorned. The Japanese approach to the surface of bronze is something worth lingering on. In many cultures, bronze is polished to a bright shine. In Japan, the aesthetic tradition of finding beauty in imperfection and the natural effects of aging led craftsmen to encourage or deliberately create surface colors that celebrated the metal's interaction with time. A sophisticated technique involving treating bronze with complex chemical solutions, including mixtures made from copper compounds and rice vinegar, could produce a range of colors from deep brown to purple-black to blue-green. The process requires years of training to master, and the results have a depth and richness that polished bronze cannot achieve. It embodies the Japanese ideal of beauty as something that comes into being through the partnership of human intention and natural processes. Japan's bronze tradition continues in the modern era, both in the ongoing creation of Buddhist statues for temples and in the work of contemporary artists drawing on old techniques while exploring new ideas. The government designation of certain master craftsmen as living national treasures has helped ensure that skills developed over 2,000 years continue to pass to new generations. In a country that values both tradition and innovation, bronze remains a living medium, connecting the ancient buried bells of the western hillsides to the temple bells that ring at midnight on New Year's Eve, reminding those who hear them that some sounds are too old and too beautiful to let go. Around 292 before the Common Era, on the island of Rhodes in the eastern Mediterranean, a sculptor named Chares of Lindos began work on a project that would push bronze engineering further than it had ever gone before. He was building a statue of the sun god Helios, commissioned to celebrate the successful defense of Rhodes against a devastating siege. The attacking army had used one of the most advanced siege weapons of the ancient world, a massive rolling tower that stood 40 meters tall and required thousands of men to operate. The Rhodians held their ground, and when the siege failed, the abandoned war equipment provided both the raw material and the inspiration for what came next. Chairs intended to build the largest bronze figure in the ancient world. It took 12 years to complete and stood over 30 meters tall on a marble base near the harbor. The construction used an iron and bronze framework with individually cast curved bronze plates, each about 1.5 meters across, fastened together to form the outer skin, a method remarkably similar to modern steel frame building techniques. The lower plates were thick for strength, thinning toward the top where wind was the main concern. The interior was filled with stone blocks as the work rose, the scaffolding growing alongside the statue like a second structure. The Colossus stood for only 54 years. In 226 before the Common Era, an earthquake snapped the statue at its weakest point, the knees, and the bronze giant toppled. A foreign ruler offered to pay for its rebuilding, but a religious oracle advised against it, and the ruins lay where they fell for more than 800 years, becoming a tourist attraction in their own right. A Roman writer visiting centuries later reported that few people could wrap their arms around the fallen figure's thumb. The ruins were reportedly sold as scrap metal in the 600s of the Common Era, the bronze loaded onto hundreds of camels for transport to a dealer, a story that may or may not be true, but that captures the endless appetite for recycled bronze that has consumed so many ancient masterworks. The 4 bronze horses that today stand on the terrace of a famous church in Venice are among the most traveled monuments in history. Originally displayed at the chariot racing arena in Constantinople, they were looted by Venetian forces during the sack of that city in 1204. Metal collars were added to hide where the heads had been cut off for easier transport. They sat in Venice for nearly 6 centuries before Napoleon took them to Paris in 1797. After his defeat in 1815, they were returned. The originals have now been moved indoors for protection, replaced on the building's face by copies. Analysis has shown that the horses are not true bronze but nearly pure copper, which gave them a distinctive reddish gold color before centuries of exposure turned them green. The great equestrian statue of Peter the Great in St. Petersburg, known as the Bronze Horseman, took 12 years to create, from 1770 to 1782. Commissioned by Empress Catherine the Great and sculpted by a French artist, it shows the Russian Tsar on a rearing horse, his arms stretched toward the river, the horse trampling a serpent that represents the enemies of progress. The Tsar's face was modeled by a young woman who was only 18 at the time, working from a death mask and various portraits to produce a likeness of striking authority. The statue sits on an enormous boulder that weighed roughly 1,500 tons when it was pulled from a Finnish swamp and took 2 years to transport to the city using a specially designed sledge. The statue inspired one of the foundational works of Russian literature, a poem written in the 1830s. During the 900-day siege of the city in the Second World War, the statue was covered with sandbags and a wooden shelter and survived the bombing virtually untouched. The residents of the besieged city took its survival as a symbol of their own endurance. The Statue of Liberty, while technically made of copper rather than bronze, belongs in this story because it demonstrates the principles of monumental metal sculpture at their most ambitious scale. Designed by a French sculptor and engineered by Gustave Eiffel, the statue's copper skin is only about 2.5 millimeters thick, supported by an inner framework of iron and steel that allows the skin to move independently. Standing 93 meters from ground to torch, the statue has become the most recognized copper structure in the world. And over time, its surface developed the same green coating that forms on bronze, turning the statue from the color of a new penny to the soft blue-green that is now its most familiar feature. Monumental bronze continues to be made in the 21st century. A monument in Dakar, Senegal, completed in 2010, stands 49 meters tall. The Statue of Unity in India, completed in 2018 and showing an independence leader, rises to 182 meters, making it the tallest statue in the world. These modern monuments carry forward a tradition that began with Chares of Lindos and his sun god on the harbor of Rhodes, the ancient and enduring human desire to express, through metal at monumental scale, the values and hopes of a people. The bronze of these statues is the same alloy that has served humanity for 6,000 years. The scale has changed. The engineering has changed. But the fundamental act, melting copper and tin, pouring the mixture into a form and letting it cool into something that will outlast the hands that made it, remains as old and as human as the alloy itself. In April of 1900, a group of Greek sponge divers working off the coast of a tiny island between Crete and the mainland discovered a shipwreck that would yield one of the most astonishing objects ever recovered from the ancient world. The divers had been sheltering from a storm when they decided to explore the nearby waters. At a depth of roughly 45 meters, they found objects scattered across the rocky seabed, including what appeared to be human limbs. The captain was alarmed, thinking they had found bodies, until closer inspection revealed that the limbs were made of bronze and marble, fragments of sculptures from a cargo of art being transported across the Mediterranean. Among the corroded statues and storage jars lay a lump of rusted metal that attracted little attention during the initial salvage. It was not until 2 years later that someone noticed gear wheels embedded in the corrosion and realized the object was a mechanism of unmatched complexity. What has come to be known as the Antikythera mechanism is a bronze astronomical calculator dating to roughly 100 years before the Common Era, and it remained the most advanced piece of mechanical engineering known from the ancient world for more than 1,000 years after it was made. The mechanism was built from sheets of bronze and originally housed in a wooden case about the size of a large book. Inside, at least 30 interlocking gear wheels, their teeth cut with remarkable precision into bronze sheets only a few millimeters thick, work together to calculate and display the movements of the sun and moon, the phases of the moon, the timing of eclipses, and the schedule of the ancient Greek athletic games. By turning a small handle, the user could advance the mechanism to any date and read off the corresponding astronomical information from dials on the front and back. Modern scanning has revealed that the mechanism is even more complex than early researchers imagined, containing gear trains that may have tracked the movements of the 5 planets visible to the naked eye. Nothing of comparable sophistication is known from the ancient world, and no similar device would be built in Europe until the astronomical clocks of the 1300s, more than 1,000 years later. The Antikythera mechanism illustrates a broader truth about the relationship between bronze and the sea. The ocean both destroys and preserves. Salt water corrodes bronze slowly, and the thin layer of compounds that forms on the surface actually protects the metal underneath. Objects that sink to the seabed may be buried in mud, creating conditions that slow further corrosion almost to a halt. The result is that some of the best preserved bronze objects from the ancient world are those that were lost at sea, sheltered by the same waters that claimed them. Underwater archaeology has become one of the richest sources of ancient bronze. The Rarest warriors, perhaps the finest surviving Greek bronze statues, were found on the seabed off southern Italy. A great bronze figure of a god in the act of throwing, either a thunderbolt or a trident, was pulled from the waters off a Greek island in 1928. A dynamic bronze figure of a dancing figure caught in mid-motion was snagged by a fishing boat in the strait between Sicily and Africa in 1998. These and many other bronze objects recovered from shipwrecks and seabeds have transformed our understanding of ancient metalwork, giving us examples that escaped the endless recycling that destroyed most bronze on dry land. Bronze's relationship with the sea goes beyond accidental preservation. The alloy has been a vital material in maritime technology since ancient times, precisely because of how well it resists salt water. Iron rusts rapidly in seawater, needing constant care and eventual replacement. Bronze, by contrast, develops a stable coating that shields the metal beneath, making it ideal for anything in prolonged contact with the ocean. Ancient shipbuilders used bronze nails and fittings to hold their hulls together, knowing the metal would outlast iron in seawater. Bronze rams, mounted on the bows of warships, were among the most important naval weapons of the ancient world, designed to punch holes in enemy vessels below the waterline. Several of these rams have been found on the seabed, including a group from a great naval battle in 241 before the Common Era, the final sea fight of a long war between Rome and Carthage. Each ram weighed roughly 120 kilograms and was cast as a single piece, with 3 blades shaped to split the wooden planking of an enemy ship on impact. In the age of sail, bronze continued to play a vital role at sea. Ships' bells, traditionally cast in bronze, served as both clocks and identification markers, each inscribed with the name of its vessel. The bell was struck at regular intervals throughout each watch, creating the system of timekeeping that organized life aboard sailing ships for centuries. Bronze navigational instruments, including devices for measuring the angle of stars above the horizon, were standard equipment on European ships from the medieval period onward, and some are still carried aboard modern vessels as backup to electronic navigation systems. In the modern era, bronze's role at sea has expanded rather than shrunk. Ship propellers are overwhelmingly made from bronze alloys, chosen for their combination of strength, corrosion resistance, and ability to withstand the damaging effects of high-speed water turbulence. A large container ship propeller can stretch more than 9 meters across and weigh more than 70 tons, making it one of the largest single bronze castings produced in the modern world. Bronze valves, pumps, and piping systems are standard equipment in the engine rooms of virtually every vessel afloat, from small fishing boats to enormous aircraft carriers. The link between bronze and the sea runs deeper than mere usefulness. Ships have always been the carriers of the long-distance trade that bronze requires, moving copper and tin across oceans to the workshops where they are combined. The ancient shipwrecks we have explored in this story, laden with copper bars and tin, testify to the age-old relationship between maritime commerce and bronze production. Bronze built ships and ships carried bronze, a partnership that has endured from the earliest Bronze Age sea routes to the container ships of our own time. In the workshops and engine rooms of 18th century Britain, as the Industrial Revolution transformed the economy and society of the Western world, bronze found itself in an unfamiliar position. For more than 5,000 years, it had been a material of supreme importance, the metal of weapons, tools, art, and power. Now, iron and steel were the stars, powering the steam engines, railways, and factories that defined the new age. Bronze might have become a relic of the past, a museum piece from a vanished era. Instead, it reinvented itself. The key to bronze's survival in the industrial age was a humble but essential part called the bearing. Every rotating shaft, every turning wheel, every sliding surface in a machine creates friction, and friction creates heat that can damage or destroy metal parts. Bronze, with its naturally low friction and its ability to absorb lubricating oil into its surface, turned out to be the ideal material for bearings, the parts that support spinning shafts and let them turn freely. A bronze bearing could carry heavy loads, resist wear, and work with very little oil. This made it essential in the steam engines, textile machines, and milling equipment that powered the Industrial Revolution. The steam engine, designed by James Watt, the machine that more than any other defined the new industrial world, relied on bronze bearings to support its main moving parts. Without bronze, the engine that changed the world would have ground to a halt within hours. In the 1870s, a new type of bronze expanded the range of what the metal could do. By adding a tiny amount of phosphorus to the standard copper-tin mixture, metalworkers created a new alloy that was harder, stronger, and more resistant to fatigue. The phosphorus also helped clean the molten metal during casting, producing a smoother, more reliable finished product. This alloy quickly became the material of choice for springs, electrical switches, and any part that needed to be both strong and springy. Its use in the expanding networks of telegraph and telephone wires was particularly important, as these growing systems needed materials that could carry electrical signals while withstanding constant vibration and changes in temperature. This alloy remains a standard in the electronics industry today, found in everything from the tiny connectors in computers to the contacts in musical instruments. The Industrial Revolution also changed how bronze itself was made. Traditional bronze casting had been done in small workshops by skilled craftsmen who controlled every step by hand. The new industrial economy demanded standard products in large quantities. Bronze foundries adapted by using bigger furnaces, precision machine tools, and testing methods that ensured each batch met exact specifications. The result was a shift from bronze as a handcrafted material to bronze as an industrial commodity, produced in specialized factories that supplied parts to machine builders, shipyards, and manufacturers across the world. The variety of bronze alloys grew enormously during and after the Industrial Revolution. Where ancient metalworkers had used essentially one recipe, modern metallurgists developed dozens of specialized mixtures, each tailored to a specific task. One type, containing a large proportion of lead, was used for bearings where the soft lead helped distribute lubricating oil. Another, containing silicon, offered better strength and corrosion resistance for marine and chemical applications. Yet another, despite being called a bronze, was actually closer to brass, combining copper with zinc and other elements to produce a metal of exceptional toughness for heavy-duty marine and industrial parts. One particularly important family of alloys combined copper with aluminum, sometimes along with iron, nickel, or manganese, to produce metals that were actually stronger than most steels, while keeping bronze's characteristic resistance to corrosion. These aluminum bronzes became the go-to material for heavy-duty bearings, gears, and structural parts in situations where both strength and corrosion resistance were needed, such as marine propellers, pump parts, and valves for the chemical industry. The story of bronze in the Industrial Revolution is really a story about finding new purposes. Unable to compete with iron and steel for the large-scale work of building bridges, laying railway tracks, or making weapons, bronze carved out a new identity as a precision material. a problem solver for the specialized situations where the general-purpose metals fell short. In bearings, springs, electrical contacts, marine hardware, and hundreds of other specific roles, bronze proved itself not just useful but essential, a material whose particular combination of qualities could not be matched by anything else. A steel bearing runs hot and wears quickly. A bronze bearing runs cool and lasts. A steel spring loses its flexibility over time. A phosphor bronze spring maintains it through millions of cycles. A steel fitting in salt water rusts within months. A bronze fitting endures for decades. This process of finding new niches has continued into our own time, with new bronze alloys being developed for uses that the engineers of the early Industrial Revolution could not have dreamed of. But the underlying principle remains the same. Bronze endures not because it is the strongest metal, or the cheapest, or the most common, but because it occupies a unique place in the range of what metals can do, a place that no other material can fully take. The ancient alloy, born in the ashes of a prehistoric fire, had found a way to make itself indispensable all over again, not as the leading material of the age, but as the quiet specialist, the problem solver, the metal you reach for when nothing else will do. On the evening of June 10, 2020, in the city of Bristol, England, a crowd of protesters wrapped ropes around a bronze statue of a man named Edward Colston, a 17th century merchant who had transported an estimated 84,000 enslaved Africans to the Americas. They pulled the statue from its base. It toppled with a dull metallic thud, was dragged through the streets and thrown into the harbor. The moment, captured on cameras and broadcast around the world, forced a question that had been building for years. What happens when a bronze monument built to honor becomes a symbol of shame? The statue had stood in the city center since 1895, put up not by people who had known Colston, but by later admirers who wished to celebrate his charitable giving while overlooking how he made his money. It had been the subject of debate for years, with petitions for its removal and proposals for explanatory plaques repeatedly blocked. In the end, the protesters did what years of process had not. The statue was later fished out of the water, and the people who pulled it down were charged but acquitted by a jury. The 19th century was the golden age of the bronze public monument. Across Europe, the Americas, and the colonial world, cities filled their parks and squares with bronze statues of generals, political leaders, monarchs, industrialists, and national heroes. The reasons were partly practical and partly political. The Industrial Revolution had made bronze casting cheaper and faster than ever before, with large foundries able to produce statues to order from models supplied by sculptors. At the same time, the rise of nationalism and the creation of new nation-states generated an intense hunger for public symbols of identity. Every capital needed its bronze heroes. Every town square needed its war memorial. Bronze, with its air of permanence and nobility, was the natural choice. France led the way with particular enthusiasm. Paris alone gained hundreds of bronze public sculptures during the second half of the century, turning the city into an outdoor gallery of French history. In Germany, the unification of the country in 1871 triggered its own wave of monument building. Across the Atlantic, the United States filled its parks and city squares with bronze figures of presidents, military leaders, and civic founders. The equestrian statue showing a leader on horseback became the dominant form. The format carried a built-in message of authority and command, the horse representing military strength, the elevated position placing the subject literally above the viewer. A popular myth holds that the position of the horse's legs in such statues indicates how the rider died. In truth, no such rule exists, and the poses are chosen for artistic and structural reasons. War memorials make up the largest single group of bronze public monuments. After the First World War, nearly every town and village in Britain, France, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the United States erected some form of memorial to its dead. In France alone, nearly 1.5 million soldiers were killed, and the demand for memorials was met by a near-industrial production of bronze figures, with thousands of nearly identical statues of ordinary soldiers appearing in town squares across the country. A second great wave of monument building came after the Second World War, when newly independent nations in Africa and Asia used bronze monuments to forge national identities separate from their colonial past. In many cases, the same foundries that had produced statues of colonial officials now cast figures of independence heroes. The material and the artistic language were the same, but the meaning was fundamentally different. The most charged chapter in the story of bronze monuments has been the debate over statues honoring the leaders of the American Confederacy. Contrary to what many assume, most of these monuments were not erected right after the Civil War. The majority were built between 1890 and 1920 during the height of racial segregation laws, and many more were added during the civil rights struggles of the 1950s and 60s. These monuments were largely funded by organizations dedicated to promoting a particular version of history, and their placement in public squares and on courthouse lawns was intended to send a specific political message. More than 700 such monuments still stood across the American South by 2015. After the Charleston church shooting, 8 were removed. After the violence in Charlottesville in 2017, 48 more came down. After the events of 2020, more than 110 were taken down in a single year. What to do with removed bronze monuments is a question without an easy answer. Some have gone to museums, others to cemeteries or battlefields. One notable statue was eventually melted down, and the metal was given to a heritage center to be transformed into a new work of public art, a powerful example of bronze's eternal ability to be remade. The debate extends far beyond America. In former Soviet nations, thousands of statues were pulled down after the fall of communism. In India, arguments over colonial-era statues continue. In South Africa, a protest movement that began with a bronze figure at a university campus spread across the country. In all of this, bronze is far more than a passive material. The very permanence that makes it ideal for monuments, its resistance to weather, its weight, its endurance, also means that bronze figures stay in public spaces long after the values they represent have shifted. A bronze statue is a statement of belief frozen in metal. When those beliefs change, the statue becomes a challenge rather than a celebration. The story of bronze monuments is, in the end, a story about what societies choose to remember and what they choose to forget, written not in ink, but in an alloy of copper and tin that was already ancient when the first empires were young. In 1618, in the Ottoman capital of Constantinople, an Armenian metalsmith named Avedis was trying to make gold. Like countless hopeful experimenters before him, he was heating combinations of metals in a pot, hoping to transform common materials into something precious. He failed to make gold. But when he poured a particular mixture of copper and tin into a mold and struck the cooled disc with a hammer, the sound that came out was extraordinary, a shimmering layered tone that hung in the air long after the strike, rich and beautiful and unlike anything produced by ordinary bronze. The Sultan, hearing of this discovery, summoned Avedis to make cymbals for the Ottoman military bands, the driving percussion ensembles whose rhythms accompanied Ottoman armies on their campaigns. The Sultan also granted Avedis a family name, an Armenian word meaning son of a cymbal maker. More than 4 centuries later, the company that Avedis founded remains family-owned, operating from a factory in Massachusetts, where the secret alloy recipe, passed from generation to generation within the family, continues to produce what many musicians consider the finest cymbals in the world. It is one of the oldest family businesses on Earth, and its entire existence rests on the way a particular bronze alloy vibrates when struck. The relationship between bronze and music is ancient, far older than this story. Bronze rings. When a bronze cymbal or bell is hit, the impact sets the entire body of metal vibrating at multiple frequencies at once, producing a rich, layered sound that sustains far longer than the same note produced by wood, clay, or iron. This quality comes from bronze's particular combination of weight, springiness, and internal structure. A disc of pure copper, if struck, gives a dull, short-lived thud. A disc of pure tin would simply crack, but the alloy of the two in the right proportions creates a material that sings. The earliest bronze musical instruments date to the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, when small cymbals and clappers appear in the archaeological record of Mesopotamia and Egypt. Pairs of bronze cymbals have been found in Egyptian tombs from around 1500 years before the Common Era. Bronze rattles sacred to the goddess Hathor were shaken during temple rituals. The ancient Israelites also used bronze cymbals in their worship as recorded in their sacred texts. In China, as we have seen, sets of tuned bronze bells from the Zhou dynasty reached levels of acoustic refinement unmatched anywhere else in the ancient world. But perhaps the most profound expression of bronze's musical potential is the gamelan, the traditional orchestra of Java and Bali in Indonesia. A gamelan ensemble consists primarily of bronze instruments. There are metallophones with bronze bars that are struck by mallets. There are sets of small bronze pots arranged on wooden frames. There are hanging bronze gongs of many sizes. And there is the great gong, whose deep resonance signals the beginning of each musical cycle. The bronze used for the finest gamelan instruments is a specific mixture of roughly 10 parts copper to 3 parts tin, a proportion unusually rich in tin that produces a bright, shimmering sound considered the highest ideal of gamelan tone. The making of a gamelan instrument is a sacred act in Javanese and Balinese culture. The master smiths are respected figures whose work is surrounded by prayers, offerings, and the observation of favorable days. The tuning of a gamelan set is done entirely by ear and by tradition, as the two main Javanese musical scales do not match Western tuning and cannot be standardized. Each gamelan set is therefore unique, tuned to its own internal relationships, and instruments from different sets cannot be played together. When a gamelan performs, the interlocking patterns of its bronze voices create a texture of extraordinary complexity, with multiple melodic and rhythmic layers weaving together. The French composer Debussy heard a Javanese gamelan at the Paris World Fair in 1889 and declared its music superior to the traditions of European concert halls. The Javanese gamelan was recognized as an important cultural heritage of humanity by the United Nations in 2011. The gong, perhaps the simplest of bronze instruments, is also among the most widespread. Gongs appear across East and Southeast Asia, from China and Japan through Korea, Vietnam, Myanmar, Thailand, the Philippines, and the islands of Indonesia. The largest can be over a meter across. In many cultures, gongs serve not only as instruments, but as signals, timekeepers, and sacred objects. In some Southeast Asian communities, a family's wealth was traditionally measured not in gold or land, but in the number and quality of its bronze gongs. Bronze singing bowls have become one of the most recognized bronze instruments in the modern world. These bowls, which produce a sustained multi-layered tone when rubbed with a wooden or leather stick, have been used in Buddhist and Hindu meditation practices for centuries. The sound changes in pitch and intensity as the stick circles the rim, creating an effect that many people find deeply calming. In Western music, bronze's most prominent role is in the cymbal section and in tubular bells. The modern orchestral cymbal is typically made from a bronze alloy of about 80% copper and 20% tin, known as bell bronze. In the 1700s, European composers began incorporating cymbals into their orchestral works, bringing the Ottoman military sound into the concert hall. The rival cymbal company, founded in 1981 after a family dispute, uses a similar alloy, and between the two companies they produce the vast majority of professional cymbals used worldwide. continuing a tradition that began with a failed attempt to make gold in an Ottoman workshop. Bronze instruments have also found their way into unexpected corners of modern life. The growing interest in sound therapy and meditation has created a worldwide market for singing bowls, gongs, and chimes made of bronze, extending the musical reach of this metal into wellness centers, yoga studios, and streaming playlists designed for relaxation and sleep, places far removed from the Ottoman military bands and Javanese palace courts where bronze music began. Perhaps, right now, as you listen to these words, the gentle sound of a bronze bowl is not so far away from this very moment of rest. Sometime around 280 before the Common Era, a Roman citizen walking through the Forum might have stopped at a market stall and placed a heavy bronze disc on the counter. The coin, known as an as, weighed roughly a Roman pound, about 327 grams, and was cast rather than stamped. On one side, it bore the image of the two-faced god Janus. On the other, the prow of a warship. This was the foundation of Rome's earliest money system. Unlike the elegant silver coins of the Greeks, Roman money began with bronze, the everyday metal of tools and farming. A Roman coin was not a promise of value backed by a distant treasury. It was value itself, a lump of useful metal worth roughly what it weighed. To make change, a merchant might literally cut a coin in half. There was something bluntly honest about this arrangement. The money was the metal, and the metal was the money. Before these coins, Romans used irregular lumps of bronze that were weighed rather than counted, as shapeless as the earliest transactions they made possible. These evolved into rectangular bronze bars, stamped with simple designs. The round, standardized coin was the next step, but the weight proved impractical. Carrying enough bronze for a day's shopping required real physical effort. Over the following century, the standard weight of the coin was steadily reduced from 1 Roman pound to half a pound, then to a quarter, then to a sixth, and eventually to a single Roman ounce. This steady shrinking was driven by economic pressure, especially the enormous costs of Rome's wars with Carthage, and it set a pattern that would repeat throughout the history of money. When times get hard, the coins get lighter. The Chinese developed their own parallel tradition of bronze coinage, one that followed an entirely different path. During the period of competing kingdoms before China was unified, different states produced coins in wonderfully varied shapes, including spade-shaped coins, knife-shaped coins, and round coins with square holes in the center. When the first emperor unified China in 221 before the Common Era, he standardized the currency on the round coin with a square center hole. This simple design remained the basic form of Chinese money for more than 2,000 years, the longest-lived coin design in human history. The square hole allowed coins to be strung on cords for easy carrying and counting, and the form spread throughout China's cultural sphere, influencing coins in Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and Southeast Asia. In the medieval Islamic world, bronze coins served as the smallest unit in a three-metal system. Gold coins served the wealthy, silver coins served merchants, and bronze coins served ordinary people in their daily business. The name for the small bronze coin came from a Latin word for a Roman bronze coin, showing the direct line of inheritance between Roman and Islamic monetary traditions. The British penny has one of the longest continuous histories of any coin on Earth. First made in silver by an Anglo-Saxon king in the late 700s, the penny stayed silver for nearly 1,000 years. The first copper pennies were not struck until 1797, massive coins 1.5 inches across, produced at a factory in Birmingham using one of the earliest industrial applications of the steam engine. In 1860, the British penny was made smaller and switched to a bronze recipe of 95% copper with small additions of tin and zinc, a composition that stayed essentially the same for more than 130 years. The American cent traces its story to the large copper cents first produced in 1793. The penny showing Abraham Lincoln, introduced in 1909 to mark the 100th anniversary of his birth, was the first American coin to carry the portrait of a real person, breaking a long tradition of using symbolic figures. The most significant change came in 1982, when the United States Mint quietly switched from a bronze recipe of 95% copper and 5% zinc to a zinc core with a thin copper coating. The reason was purely economic. The rising price of copper had made each penny cost more to produce than its face value of 1 cent. The new coins weigh noticeably less and make a different sound when dropped, a dull thud rather than the bright ring of the older bronze pennies. The economics of the modern penny tell a broader story about bronze and value. By the early 2010s, the cost of making a single American penny had risen to more than 2 cents, meaning the government lost money on every coin it produced. Canada stopped making its 1-cent coin in 2012. Several other countries have done the same. Despite repeated proposals, the United States has not followed, and the penny continues to be made in the billions each year. Bronze coins have also served as a way to send messages throughout history. Roman emperors used them to advertise military victories and building projects. Medieval kings stamped them with religious symbols. The modern euro, introduced in 2002, features bronze-colored 1, 2, and 5-cent coins, each with a national design on one face and a shared European design on the other. There is a gentle irony in the story of bronze coinage. It has always been the money of ordinary people, the smallest denomination, the coin least likely to be saved or treasured. Yet precisely because bronze coins were used so widely by so many, they are among the most common objects found at archaeological sites, turning up in enormous numbers wherever people once lived. Gold and silver coins were hoarded and hidden away. Bronze coins were spent, lost, dropped in gutters and scattered in the dirt. They are, in a quiet way, the most honest artifacts of the ancient world, traces of the everyday transactions that kept civilizations running, left behind by the nameless millions who carried them to market, to the temple, and to the grave. When the Statue of Liberty was unveiled in New York Harbor on October 28, 1886, she was not green. She was the color of a new penny, a bright, burnished copper brown that gleamed in the autumn sunlight. Photographs from the earliest years show a figure that looks startlingly different from the one we know today, the metal skin still close to its original color, only beginning the slow chemical change that would eventually turn the entire surface, the soft blue-green we now recognize, instantly. The transformation took roughly 30 years. By the early 1900s, the city's salty air, industrial smoke, and rainfall had finished the job, converting the outer surface into a thin layer of copper compounds known as patina. When someone proposed cleaning the statue back to its original copper shine, the idea was rejected by public outcry. The green had become the statue's identity. And more importantly, it was protecting the copper underneath. The patina layer, only a fraction of a millimeter thick, acts as a shield between the remaining metal and the corrosive air. Remove the patina, and you expose fresh copper to renewed attack. The green skin is not a flaw. It is armor. The common name for the green coating that forms on copper and its alloys comes from an old French phrase meaning green of Greece, a name that reflects the long association between green-coated bronze and the ancient world. When Renaissance Europeans came across the corroded bronze objects of classical times, the green surfaces became a mark of age, genuineness, and the passage of time. This association was so strong that green coatings, whether natural or created on purpose, became something valued in themselves, a visible certificate of antiquity that added prestige to bronze objects. Architects and designers in the 1700s and 1800s deliberately chose green patinated bronze for their buildings, using artificial methods to produce in days what nature would take decades to accomplish. The process by which bronze develops its coating is gradual and depends on where the bronze sits and what the air contains. When fresh bronze meets the air, the copper first reacts with oxygen to form a reddish compound that gives newly exposed bronze a warm, dark brown tone. Over time, in moist conditions, further changes produce a range of green and blue compounds. The exact shade and texture of the result depend on the local environment. Bronze in a polluted city develops a different color from bronze in clean sea air, and both differ from bronze in a dry desert, which may keep its dark brown or even golden tone for centuries. The relationship between artists and the surface of bronze has been complex throughout history. In the ancient world, most bronze objects were kept polished and bright. The Greeks rubbed their bronze statues with oil to maintain a warm, golden brown tone. Roman bronzes were often deliberately treated with chemical mixtures to achieve specific colors, a practice that shows an early understanding of surface chemistry. The Roman writer Pliny recorded that the most prized color for bronze was a glossy liver brown, produced by treating the surface with special compounds. These deliberately colored surfaces were not attempts to fake age but independent artistic choices. During the Renaissance, a whole vocabulary grew up around the evaluation of bronze surfaces. A noble patina, the smooth green coating that develops naturally over centuries, was valued as proof of real age. A false patina, applied artificially to make new bronze look old, was condemned as dishonest. The irony is that the techniques for creating artificial surfaces became so refined that by the 1700s, the best artificial work was virtually impossible to tell from the real thing. Japanese bronze artists developed what may be the most thoughtful approach to surface treatment of any culture. The Japanese tradition of finding beauty in imperfection and the natural effects of aging gave metalworkers a fundamentally different relationship with the coloring of bronze. Rather than polishing to a bright finish, Japanese craftsmen developed methods of treating the surface with complex solutions, including mixtures made from copper compounds and rice vinegar, to produce a range of tones from deep brown to purple-black to blue-green. The process takes years to learn properly, and the results have a depth and complexity that polished bronze simply cannot match. It is an approach that sees beauty as something that emerges through the meeting of human effort and natural processes. The care of bronze surfaces has become one of the most debated topics in the preservation of cultural treasures. When a centuries-old bronze enters a museum, the people who look after it must decide whether to keep the existing surface, which is part of the object's history and identity, or to remove it to reveal the original metal underneath. The choice is not just about appearance. In some cases, certain types of surface corrosion can actively eat into the metal, particularly when certain salt-like compounds are present. This destructive form of corrosion shows up as bright green powdery spots that can spread and damage the bronze, and it must be treated to prevent further harm. Telling the difference between harmless protective coating and harmful active corrosion requires careful analysis and often difficult judgment. The two Greek warrior statues found off the coast of Italy in the 1970s offer a vivid example of these challenges. When they were pulled from the sea, their surfaces were covered in thick layers of marine buildup, sand, shells, and corrosion products that hid the original bronze. Restorers spent years carefully removing this buildup, constantly deciding how much to take off. Too little, and the statues stayed hidden. Too much, and original details would be lost forever. The debate over whether their current appearance represents the true surface of the sculptures continues among experts today. Modern bronze sculptors have developed an extensive range of surface treatments. Various chemicals applied to heated bronze can produce browns, blacks, reds, oranges, greens, blues, yellows, and creams. Multiple layers can be built up to create surfaces that shift in color depending on the angle and the light. The final surface is then sealed with wax or lacquer to preserve it. The specialists who apply these finishes are among the most skilled and sought-after artisans in the art world. The outdoor bronze statues that fill our cities are in a constant state of slow change. The generals on horseback, the lions and eagles, the Buddhas and saints, they are all quietly reacting with the air, the rain, the touch of hands, and the visits of birds. This is not decay in the ordinary sense. Unlike iron, which rusts destructively until nothing is left, bronze's surface coating reaches a kind of balance with its surroundings. It changes color but does not lose material. A properly cared for bronze can last essentially forever. Patina is not something that happens to bronze against its will. It is what bronze does. It is the metal's way of growing old gracefully, of recording the passage of time in chemistry rather than words, of wearing its years like a garment rather than a wound. On the morning of January 15, 2009, a passenger plane took off from an airport in New York and 3 minutes later flew into a flock of geese at an altitude of roughly 850 meters. Both engines lost power almost immediately. The pilot, with barely more than 3 minutes to make a decision, chose to land the aircraft on a river. The plane hit the water at roughly 260 kilometers per hour, and all 155 people on board survived. In the weeks that followed, investigators examined every part of the aircraft for signs of failure. Among the components that performed exactly as they were supposed to were the bronze bearings and fittings in the landing gear, the cargo door mechanisms, and the wing control systems, all of which had absorbed the extraordinary stresses of the water landing without breaking apart. These parts were made from specialized bronze alloys, engineered specifically for the kind of extreme loads, temperature swings, and harsh conditions that aviation demands. The pilot became a hero. The bronze alloys that helped hold his plane together remained anonymous, as industrial materials usually do. Modern bronze engineering represents the result of 6,000 years of alloy development, where the Bronze Age craftsman worked with essentially one recipe, copper with roughly 10% tin. The modern engineer can choose from dozens of carefully designed compositions, each one tailored to a specific set of needs. Official catalogues of copper alloys list hundreds of distinct bronze mixtures, each with documented strength, corrosion behavior, and recommended uses. The distance between that first accidental alloy in a Serbian kiln and the precision alloys of the 21st century is a measure of how far the science of mixing metals has come. One family of alloys made by combining copper with aluminum and sometimes iron, nickel, or manganese has become the workhorse of modern high-performance bronze. These alloys are, surprisingly, stronger than most steels while weighing about 10% less. And unlike steel, they do not corrode in seawater, do not create sparks when struck, and keep their strength at high temperatures. A thin protective layer forms naturally on their surface, similar to what happens with pure aluminum, and this layer heals itself if scratched, providing lasting protection even in the harshest conditions. In the maritime world, these alloys dominate the hardware that keeps ships running. Ship propellers are overwhelmingly made from bronze, chosen for their ability to withstand the enormous forces created when spinning blades produce and collapse tiny vacuum bubbles at high speed, a destructive process that can eat away at the surface of lesser metals. A large container ship propeller can stretch more than 9 meters across and weigh more than 70 tons, making it one of the largest single bronze castings produced in the modern world. The casting of such a propeller is itself a feat of engineering, requiring exact control of the alloy mix, melting temperature, pouring speed, and cooling schedule. Because the alloy resists seawater so well, these propellers can work for decades with minimal upkeep, a crucial advantage for ships that spend months at sea between visits to dry dock. The defense industry depends heavily on bronze for tasks where strength, corrosion resistance, and safety all matter. The property of bronze that makes it unable to produce sparks when it strikes a hard surface is essential wherever flammable gases or explosives are nearby. Bronze wrenches, hammers, and screwdrivers are standard equipment in oil refineries, chemical plants, and ammunition factories, anywhere a stray spark from a steel tool could cause disaster. In mining, where explosive gas can build up underground, non-sparking bronze tools are not just preferred but often required by law. In the world of electronics, a springy bronze alloy containing a small amount of phosphorus remains the material of choice for the tiny springs, connectors, and contact pieces that populate every electronic device. The connector in your phone, the spring contacts in your laptop's battery compartment, the relay switches in your car, many of these contain parts made of this alloy that flex millions of times over their working life without breaking. The global market for this single type of bronze strip is valued at billions each year, driven by the relentless growth of consumer electronics, car electronics, and communications equipment. The oil and gas industry uses bronze alloys extensively for pumps, valves, and fittings in environments where both corrosion and spark hazards exist. Offshore oil platforms, battered by salt spray and extreme conditions, rely on bronze parts for critical systems. Equipment used deep underground during drilling often includes bronze bearings that must function under tremendous pressure and heat. The ability of bronze to absorb and hold lubricating oil in its surface pores makes it especially valuable where regular oiling is difficult or impossible. Bronze has also found a growing role in the buildings we live and work in, though often in ways we do not notice. Bronze door handles, hinges, and locks are chosen for high-quality buildings where durability and beauty both matter. The natural coloring that develops on architectural bronze over time is considered an asset, and many designers choose bronze specifically for its ability to age with grace. Famous buildings in New York and other cities feature bronze on their facades, the metal developing a rich character over the decades that painted steel or aluminum simply cannot achieve. In the world of precision machines, bronze bearings and sliding surfaces remain essential in machine tools, printing presses, rolling mills, and countless other industrial devices. The principle has not changed since the earliest days of the Industrial Revolution. A steel shaft turning in a bronze bearing generates less friction, less heat, and less wear than the same shaft in a steel bearing. And if the oil supply fails, the bronze bearing will wear down to protect the shaft, a self-sacrificing quality that has saved many machines over the years. The global bronze industry today produces hundreds of thousands of tons of alloy each year for uses spanning every part of the modern economy. The largest foundries bear little resemblance to the workshops of ancient metalworkers, yet the basic chemistry is exactly the same: copper and tin, combined in precise proportions with carefully measured additions of other elements, produce a material that is greater than the sum of its parts. The ancient discovery that mixing two soft metals can create something hard, strong, and versatile remains as important in the age of advanced materials as it was in the age of stone and bone. On the evening of February 3, 2010, at an auction house in London, a slender bronze figure, barely 6 feet tall, stood alone on a platform under bright lights. The sculpture showed a man walking, his body stretched and thinned to the point of near dissolution, his surface rough and pitted as though time itself were wearing him away. It was a work by the Swiss sculptor Alberto Giacometti, one of several casts of a figure he had shaped obsessively during the last decade of his life. The bidding opened and climbed with startling speed. When the hammer fell, the figure had sold for the equivalent of roughly $104 million, making it the most expensive sculpture ever sold at auction at that time. 5 years later, another of his elongated bronze figures sold for $141 million, breaking that record again. These are staggering sums for any work of art, but particularly for a bronze, a material that can be reproduced in multiple identical casts from a single mold. What the buyers were paying for was not the metal, but the vision, the particular way this artist had used bronze to express the loneliness and vulnerability of the human figure in the modern world. The story of bronze in modern art begins with Auguste Rodin, who, more than any other artist, freed bronze sculpture from the stiff conventions that had held it for centuries. His most famous work, a muscular man seated in deep thought with chin resting on hand, was originally part of a much larger sculptural doorway. It became perhaps the most recognized bronze sculpture in the world when it was reimagined as a standalone figure. More than 20 large casts exist in museums and public spaces around the globe, and several have sold at auction for more than $10 million each. But Rodin's real revolution was about surface. Where traditional academic sculptors sought smooth, idealized surfaces that hid any trace of the artist's hand, Rodin deliberately left his bronze surfaces rough. You can see the marks of his fingers in the clay, the seams of the mold, the small accidents of the casting process. He treated the bronze surface not as a polished skin, but as a landscape of marks that was inseparable from the sculpture's meaning. His critics called it laziness. His admirers recognized that he had changed the very definition of what a sculpture could be. Rodin opened the door for the extraordinary variety of bronze sculpture in the 20th and 21st centuries. Constantin Brancusi, a Romanian sculptor working in Paris, moved in the opposite direction from Rodin, polishing his bronze forms to a mirror finish that turned the sculptures into reflective surfaces, incorporating the viewer and the surroundings into the work itself. One of his sleek, abstract bronze forms meant to evoke the path of a bird in flight was so far removed from traditional sculpture that when it was shipped to the United States in the 1920s, customs officials refused to call it art and taxed it as manufactured goods. The resulting court case established the legal principle that abstract art qualifies as art, a landmark decision that still matters in art law today. Henry Moore, the British sculptor who shaped so much of mid-20th century public art, used bronze to explore the relationship between the human body and the landscape. His great reclining figures, vast bronze forms with flowing contours pierced by open spaces, sit in plazas and parks from London to New York to Singapore. Moore typically began with small models, sometimes only a few inches long, that were then scaled up and cast at industrial foundries. His largest bronzes weigh several tons, yet they keep the feel of something shaped by hand. Giacometti himself represents a different pole of modern bronze, the existentialist vision. Working in a cramped Paris studio surrounded by years of accumulated dust and debris, he created figures that were the opposite of classical bronze ideals. Where Greek and Renaissance sculptors celebrated the human body in its power, Giacometti reduced his figures to thin, near-skeletal forms that seemed to be vanishing even as they stood. His working method was obsessive, building up a figure in plaster, then scraping it back, building again, scraping again, sometimes for years before declaring a work finished. The rough, scarred surfaces of his bronzes suggest a body worn down by the weight of existing. The bronze itself becomes a symbol of survival, the thin thread of material that keeps the figure from dissolving into nothing. Louise Bourgeois, the French-American artist who lived and worked into her late 90s, used bronze for some of the most psychologically intense sculptures of the late 20th century. Her most famous work is a monumental bronze spider standing more than 9 meters tall, inspired by memories of her mother. Multiple casts stand in cities from London to Tokyo to Bilbao, where the work has become an unofficial symbol of the museum it guards. The spider, at that scale, becomes simultaneously sheltering and threatening, protective and unsettling, capturing the complexity of the mother-child relationship in a way that words alone cannot. The modern art market has built a new economy around additioned bronze. Because bronze can be cast in numbered sets, typically 1 through 8 plus extra proofs, a single composition can generate multiple sales at prices that would have seemed unreal a generation ago. This system has made bronze sculpture one of the most commercially significant forms in the contemporary art world. Artists continue to choose the material not because they lack alternatives, but because bronze offers something no other medium can fully provide: a sense of permanence joined with warmth, a surface that changes and lives over time, a weight that commands attention. The great art foundries of today combine ancient technique with modern tools. A contemporary bronze may begin as a hand-shaped clay model, be scanned into a digital file, enlarged by computer, printed in 3 dimensions, molded in rubber, and finally cast using the same basic lost wax process that a Benin craftsman or a Renaissance sculptor would recognize. The joining of old and new is fitting for a material that has always lived at the crossing point of art and engineering. Bronze endures in the art world because it offers something that no other material can fully replace, a connection to a sculptural tradition stretching back to the very dawn of metalworking, combined with a physical presence that, even in an age of screens and virtual experiences, still has the power to stop a person in their tracks and make them look. In a hospital corridor in Santiago, Chile, sometime around 2013, a nurse walked past a row of newly installed door handles and push plates. They were a warm brown color, different from the usual stainless steel, but otherwise unremarkable. She might not have given them a second thought. But those handles were part of a study that would change how hospitals think about keeping patients safe. The trial, conducted across several hospitals, found that replacing ordinary steel and plastic surfaces with copper alloy versions reduced infections caught in the hospital by more than 58%. The reason was ancient. Copper and its alloys, including bronze, are naturally hostile to germs. When bacteria land on a bronze surface, the copper disrupts their outer membranes, enters their cells, and destroys their inner workings, killing more than 99% of harmful organisms within 2 hours. This property was not truly new. The ancient Egyptians used copper vessels to purify water more than 4,000 years ago. An ancient Indian medical text recommended storing water in copper vessels for health. But the modern scientific confirmation of this effect, and its formal recognition by regulators as a proven antimicrobial property, opened a new chapter in the story of the oldest alloy. In an age of gene therapies and artificial intelligence, one of the most effective public health tools turned out to be a material discovered more than 6,000 years ago. When the global pandemic struck in 2020, research showing that the virus responsible survived on steel and plastic for up to 3 days but lasted only 4 hours on copper surfaces suddenly drew enormous attention. Hospitals, train systems, and public buildings around the world began considering copper and bronze for high-touch surfaces like door handles, elevator buttons, handrails, and light switches. The irony was not lost on anyone. In an era of the most advanced medicine in human history, an ancient metal offered a startlingly simple line of defense. The future of bronze also connects with the revolution in new ways of making things. Traditional bronze casting, whether by lost wax or sand methods, is limited in the shapes it can produce. Complex internal structures, lattice patterns, and organic forms that would be impossible to create with conventional molds become possible when fine bronze powder is fused together layer by layer using a focused beam of light. This approach can produce parts with precisely controlled textures and internal features, opening possibilities for both antimicrobial applications, where a rough surface with more area can kill germs more effectively, and for aerospace and marine uses, where lighter weight and better cooling can improve performance beyond what traditional casting allows. Bronze recycling is another area where ancient practice meets modern need. Bronze has always been one of the most recycled materials on Earth, for the simple reason that it never loses its qualities through remelting. A bronze propeller taken from a retired ship can be melted down and recast as a bearing, a bell, or a sculpture with no loss of quality. The copper atoms do not wear out or change through repeated cycles of melting and cooling. The Roman practice of melting enemy weapons into statues, the medieval practice of melting statues into cannons, and the modern practice of collecting industrial bronze scrap are all expressions of the same truth. Bronze is endlessly recyclable. In an era of growing concern about resource use and environmental care, this quality gives bronze a real advantage. The energy needed to recycle bronze is only about 15 to 20% of the energy needed to produce it from scratch, making recycled bronze one of the most energy-efficient industrial materials available. Roughly 40% of the world's copper supply already comes from recycled sources, a figure expected to grow. The demand for copper, the main ingredient in bronze, is expected to rise sharply in the coming decades, driven by the shift toward renewable energy and electric vehicles. Electric cars use 3 to 4 times as much copper as traditional ones. A single large wind turbine can contain up to 30 tons. This growing demand puts pressure on copper supplies, but also ensures that bronze alloys will continue to play important roles in the green energy systems of the future, from the bearings in wind turbines to the electrical contacts in power grid equipment. Tin, the other half of the bronze recipe, faces challenges of its own. Much of the world's tin comes from mines in regions where the environmental and human costs of extraction have drawn criticism. On certain Indonesian islands, mining has caused widespread damage to forests and coral reefs. In other regions, mining has been linked to forced labor. Responsible sourcing efforts are underway, but the gap between good intentions and conditions on the ground remains wide, a reminder that the ancient problem of tin, the scarce and difficult ingredient that has shaped the story of bronze from the very beginning, has not gone away. In research laboratories, scientists continue to find new possibilities in bronze. New alloys that combine copper and tin with multiple other elements in unusual proportions are being studied for their exceptional strength and resistance to heat. Techniques for manipulating the inner structure of bronze at the tiniest scales are producing materials with properties that rival some ceramics while keeping the flexibility that ceramics lack. Other bronze alloys that can remember their original shape and return to it when heated are being explored for use in medical devices and aerospace. And the cultural future of bronze is as rich as its technical one. New monuments are being cast to honor people and events that earlier generations overlooked. In Alabama, a memorial opened in 2018 uses bronze sculpture to acknowledge the victims of racial violence, using the material's traditional association with honor and permanence to remember not the powerful but the powerless. In London, a bronze statue of a Jamaican-born nurse who served in a 19th century war was unveiled in 2016, the first named statue of a black woman in the country. Bronze, the metal of kings and conquerors for thousands of years, is being reclaimed by those whose stories were long untold. And so we come to the end of our journey. We have followed bronze from a small, accidental discovery in the highlands of ancient Serbia, across every continent and through every age. We have seen it arm the soldiers of the first empires and fill the tombs of pharaohs. We have watched it shaped into dancing girls and ritual vessels, cast into bells and cannons, poured into the molds of Renaissance masters, and pressed into the coins that ordinary people carried in their pockets. We have followed it under the sea and into the sky, through the factories of the Industrial Revolution and into the hospitals of the 21st century. Through all of this, the alloy has remained the same in its essence. Copper and tin mixed together in the right proportions, producing a material greater than either of its parts. It is the first synthetic substance, the original engineered material, and it remains, after all these thousands of years, irreplaceable. The person who first held that strange, hard metal in the ashes of a prehistoric fire could not have dreamed of everything their discovery would become. But they started something that has accompanied humanity through every stage of its journey, changing its role but never losing its place. And now, as you settle deeper into rest, you might picture that alloy one last time. Imagine its warm golden brown color, the way it catches the light, the way it slowly turns green as the years pass, recording time on its surface the way rings record the life of a tree. Bronze does not fight against time. It wears it gracefully. If there is a lesson in the story of bronze, perhaps it is simply this: the most enduring things are not always the hardest or the strongest. Sometimes they are the ones that adapt, that find new purposes when old ones fade, that change their surface while keeping their nature. Good night, and rest well, knowing that somewhere in the world tonight, the same alloy that was born in a fire 6,000 years ago is still being shaped by human hands, still finding new reasons to exist, still quietly, stubbornly, beautifully enduring.